For 4 days, the boy burned with fever and prepared to die. But in the morning, he gets up from his bedding, his eyes devoid of both fever and childhood. Inside him, a gray, empty space the size of a cubic meter has opened up, and the memory of an archery champion resides in the body of a starving village child. A village where children will begin to die this winter. The cold wakes him before he regains consciousness. Every bone aches as if it were being twisted from the inside. His throat is filled with smoke and a sour taste. Do-hyun opens his eyes and sees a low ceiling made of blackened logs. It's not his apartment. It's not a hospital. He raises his hands to his face and freezes. Children's fingers, dirt under his fingernails. He sits up and nearly falls back down. His body feels as light as an empty backpack, but moves as if stuffed with stones. Someone small is coughing nearby. Curled up in a ball on the mat next to him is a girl of about 6. Her face is pale. Her lips are chapped. Her chest squeaks with every breath. He knows her name is Min-soo. He knows it as surely as he knows his own name. His sister. And she's dying. Not today, not tomorrow, but this winter will take her. This knowledge sits in his head like a hammered-in nail. Not a guess, a fact. In the corner, his mother sifts millet in a clay bowl. Not a handful, a pinch. She counts every grain. His father stands frozen by the hearth, broad shoulders. His gaze is lost in the fire. Chang Gon-min, a former soldier. He stares into the flames the way people do who have already decided everything for everyone. His mind works in fits and starts. 12 years old, a body that's not his own, but the name is the same. Jang Do-hyun, the village of Tolgok, the north of the kingdom. Winter is 2 months away. There's no food. He takes a deeper breath and starts coughing. The air tears at his lungs. This isn't a dream. Dreams have no smell. But here, it reeks of rancid fat and smoke and something else, slightly sweet, that makes his nose wrinkle. That's what illness smells like in a house with nothing to treat it. And this is where the strangest part begins. A gray, empty space unfolds in his head. 1 cubic meter. He doesn't know where he knows this volume from, but he knows. Just as he knows his sister's name. Put it down. Take it out. Invisible to others. The words float up on their own. Do-hyun clenches his icy fists. Thoughts race one after another. An archery instructor. A blog about 3-ingredient meals, army first aid courses. All of this remains inside the skull of a 12-year-old boy. He stands up. His legs give way. He grabs the wall. His mother looks up, and fear flashes in her eyes. Her son hasn't gotten up in 4 days. Fever, delirium. She'd already buried her second child. And here he stands, looking at her with eyes that hold neither fever nor delirium, just something grown up. He sits down beside her and counts the millet, 238. She was off by 3 grains. He says nothing. Instead, he quietly asks where his father's bow is. His mother freezes. His father slowly turns his head. The silence grows so thick you can hear the fire crackling, and Min-soo. "There's no bow," his father says hollowly, without looking at his son. "A royal decree. All weapons were turned in 3 years ago." Do-hyun sees the lie, not on his face, on his hands. Gon-min clenches his fingers on his knees a little tighter than necessary. The soldier isn't turning in his weapon, he's hiding it. Do-hyun nods and returns to his sleeping mat. But he isn't sleeping, he's making a list. Find a bow, go into the forest before dawn, bring back meat, make bone broth for Min-soo, at least 8 hours, don't die. The house grows quiet. His father is snoring. His mother holds Min-soo close, as if shielding him. Do-hyun gets up silently. The boy's light body is both a curse and an advantage. The floorboards don't creak. His hands remember the house. Fragments of the memory of the old Do-hyun linger on the edge of his consciousness. The attic, a ladder with 3 rungs. A bow lies behind a beam, wrapped in an oil-stained rag. Short, curved. The bowstring has rotted, but the wood is alive, springy. His father took good care of it. Do-hyun steps out into the yard. The sky is black and thick with stars. The frost hasn't struck yet, but the air already bites his cheeks. In 2 months, the snow here will be waist deep, and in the village's 42 yards, children will begin to die. He knows this. He doesn't know where he knows it from. He just knows. He sits down by the woodpile and takes a knife out of the storage compartment. It's small, blunt, the only thing that existed in space when he first sensed it. He sets to work. The bowstring can be made from leather. In the woodpile are scraps his mother had dried to make patches. 3 strips soaked in fat will make a bowstring good for 5 shots. After that, it'll snap. So, 5. His fingers move faster than he expects. Muscle memory, not this body's, his own. Thousands of hours at the shooting range. His hands what to do even with half the time he needs. By dawn, the bow is ready. Crooked, weak, but it works. He whittles the arrows from straight branches and fletches them with birch bark, 4 of them. He sharpens the tips and singes them in the embers. Not enough for a deer, enough for a hare, if he hits it right. And he will hit it. Do-hyun slings the bow over his shoulder and heads toward the forest. Cheongrim stands like a wall 400 paces from the outermost house. Spruce trees, oaks, undergrowth as thick as a fence. The royal hunting grounds. Commoners are forbidden here. They'll chop off your hand for trespassing. Do-hyun enters without looking back. The forest greets him with silence. Not a breath of wind, no birds. Only the crunch of frozen earth. 20 minutes later, he finds an animal trail, fresh droppings, a hare. Do-hyun crouches by the roots of an oak tree and holds his breath. His breathing is steady. His eyes scan the landscape like a map. The grass is trampled on the left. The branches are gnawed at palm height. A hare passes through here every morning. He waits for 40 minutes. His body aches. The cold creeps under his jacket. His fingers on the bowstring go numb, but he waits. The hare emerges as a gray shadow, plump, well-fed. 200 years without hunters, a paradise for game, hell for the village 400 paces away. Do-hyun pulls the bowstring. The distance is 12 meters. There's no wind. He accounts for the weak bow. He accounts for his child's hands, which are trembling from hunger. He shoots. The hare twitches and falls. A clean shot, right in the neck. Do-hyun exhales. His hands are shaking, not from the cold, from relief. He picks up the warm carcass, over a kilogram. 1 hare can provide 3 days' worth of food if you know how. He knows. An hour later, he sets out for the pheasants. 2 males are feeding in a clearing. He takes down the first one from 15 meters. The second one takes flight. Do-hyun shoots on the fly. He misses. On the third shot, the bowstring wheezes ominously. 1 last arrow. The pheasant lands on a branch 20 meters away, too far for this bow. But once, Do-hyun took bronze at the championship with a dislocated shoulder and a broken sight. He aims, hits. The pheasant falls. The bowstring snaps. 4 arrows, 3 hits. The bow is dead. But in his hands, he holds a hare and 2 pheasants. He guts his prey right there in the woods. His movements are precise. He knows anatomy. Liver, heart, kidneys. Everything goes into the pot. The pheasant's giblets are set aside for a light broth for Min-soo. Something heavy on an empty stomach would kill him. He packs everything into the storage compartment. The space takes in the game and expands slightly. It's noticeable. He walks back quickly. The sun is already rising. No one must see him leaving Cheongrim. At the edge of the woods, he freezes. He listens. It's quiet. He steps out and walks toward the house at his usual pace. A boy is coming from the stream. Nothing out of the ordinary. His mother is standing in the doorway. Her face is pale. Her eyes are red. She's already realized he's gone and is about to scream. Her mouth opens, then closes. Do-hyun pulls a hare and 2 pheasants from under his jacket. Actually, they're from the storage room. From the outside, it just looks like a very roomy jacket. His mother looks at the meat, then at her son, then back at the meat. She doesn't ask where it came from. It's the first time in 6 months there's been meat in her house, and all questions will have to wait. Do-hyun walks past and asks her to put water on the stove and bring some ash. His mother moves as if in a dream. He butchers the hare on the table. The meat goes in one pile, the bones in another, the liver and heart in a separate pile. The father wakes up to the sounds and sits up. He watches his son, who works the knife as if he'd done it 1,000 times. Do-hyun doesn't look up. Pour cold water over the bones. Put them on low heat. Don't let it boil. Skim off the foam. Simmer for 8 hours. Not 3, 8. Then he takes the ashes, sifts them, pours water over them, strains them, gets lye. Boil it down and bitter crystals will form that work like salt. Not tasty, but functional. His mother looks at his hands and says nothing. These are her son's hands, but they move like the hands of another person. He rubs the rabbit meat with the lye and hangs it over the hearth. Cold smoke. In 2 days, he'll have smoked meat that won't spoil for 2 weeks. He cuts the pheasant breast into thin slices. He crumbles one into boiling water with the giblets, a light broth, for Min-soo. His sister wakes up from the smell. She lifts her head. Her eyes are huge against her gaunt face. Do-hyun waits for the broth to cool. He pours half a bowl. That's all she can have. Min-soo takes the bowl with both hands. She takes a sip. She closes her eyes. A thin stream rolls down her cheek. Not a tear. Broth. She drinks so eagerly that she spills some. Do-hyun wipes her chin with his sleeve and tells her there will be more tomorrow. The mother sits down against the wall and hides her face in her hands. Her shoulders shake. She cries silently, the way those who have forgotten how to cry out loud do. The father stands up. He walks over to the table. He looks at the neatly cut meat, at the bones in the pot, at his 12-year-old son, who was burning in the fire 4 days ago and is now feeding his sister broth from his hand. Where from? Gonmin utters a single word. From the forest, Do-hyun replies without looking up. The father clenches his fists. Chungrim. One word, and in it lies all the fear in the world. For poaching in the royal forest, they chop off the right hand. The boy is 12. Do-hyun pours another bowl and sets it in front of his father. His father looks at the broth, then at his son. He sits down, takes the bowl. His hands are shaking. He drinks it in one gulp and sits with his eyes closed for a minute, 2. Then he opens his eyes and says the bowstring is rotten. I know, Do-hyun replies. It's already snapped. His father is silent. He stands up. He goes out onto the porch. He returns with a bundle of horse tendons, old but strong. He places them on the table next to the meat and sits back down by the hearth. He doesn't say a word. Do-hyun takes the tendons. His fingers already know what to do with them. That evening, for the first time in half a year, the Chong family eats their fill. Pheasant meat with broth and millet. Min-soo falls asleep with a bowl in his hands. His father sharpens a knife by the hearth, silently, but not like yesterday. Yesterday he was staring blankly into space. Today he's sharpening a knife. The difference between these two actions is the span of a whole lifetime. Do-hyun lies on his bedding and runs through a list in his head. Tomorrow, back into the forest, find a deer trail, make proper arrows, set up a smokehouse, find out if there's a blacksmith in the village. He can't forge arrowheads without one. Figure out how many families are on the brink. The list goes on and on. But for the first time in this crazy day, Do-hyun feels something resembling calm. Not joy, not confidence, just clarity. He knows what to do. He knows how to cook from nothing. And here, he already has something. The morning of the second day began with Min-soo's cough. The wheezing had grown deeper overnight. Do-hyun woke up to the sound and immediately put the remains of yesterday's broth on the coals. The bones were still simmering. It had been 7 hours. The broth had turned murky golden and thick. He poured Min-soo a warm bowl and made sure she drank it in small sips. Then he went out into the yard. The morning was gray and cold. Smoke drifted from the chimneys between the houses. The village of Tolguk looked exactly as a dying village should look. The yards were overgrown, the fences had rotted away, half the roofs were leaky. The people he came across moved slowly, conserving their strength. That's how those move for whom every step costs calories they don't have. Do-hyun walked past 3 houses to the well. He drew some water. The water was icy cold and clear. At least he was lucky there. On the way back, he saw an old woman at the house on the far end, small, withered, hunchbacked, as if her back were trying to curl into a ring. Her eyes were sharp as a bird's. Grandma, okay? The boy's memory prompted the name. She knew herbs. She knew old songs. She knew everyone and everything in the village. Do-hyun stopped and bowed. The old woman stared at him without blinking. Then she said his eyes were different. Do-hyun asked what she meant. She replied that yesterday he had been dead, but today he was alive, and that his house had smelled of meat during the night. Do-hyun remained silent. Grandma Ok leaned closer. She said that Min-soo didn't just have a cough, that it was a fever, that without treatment, she wouldn't live to see the first snow. Then she turned and went back to her room. Do-hyun stood there with a bucket of water and felt the list in his head rearranging itself. Chest fever. In his world, it was called pneumonia. Broth would help strengthen the body, but wouldn't cure the infection. He needed herbs. He needs honey. She needs warmth and fresh air. There's no honey. He doesn't know any herbs. Local herbs, that is. But Grandma Ok does. He carried the water home. He told his mother he was going out to gather firewood. His mother looked at him with the same expression she'd had yesterday. She knew he wasn't going for firewood. She said nothing. Do-hyun took his bow with a new bowstring made of horse tendons and 4 arrows. Last night he had sharpened new flint arrowheads. They're rough. They prick his fingers, but they're sharp. They wouldn't be enough for large game, but they'd suffice for small game. He reached Cheonggrim in 5 minutes. He entered the forest and immediately veered off yesterday's trail. Today he didn't need meat. Today he needed a map. Do-hyun walked through the forest for 3 hours. He memorized everything: trails, watering holes, animal crossings, resting places, tracks, old and fresh. Deer roamed here in herds. He saw moose droppings. He saw wild boar tracks. He saw fox dens. Cheonggrim was teeming with life. 200 years without hunting had turned it into a pantry. The deer weren't afraid. One passed within 30 paces of Do-hyun and didn't even turn its head. It didn't know what a man with a bow was. Do-hyun watched it and did the math. 1 deer meant 20 kilograms of lean meat, plus bones for broth, plus the hide, plus fat, plus tendons for bowstrings and thread, plus antlers for tools. 1 deer is a week's worth of food for a family of 4, or 3 days' worth of food for 10 people, or 1 night's worth for the whole village. But a deer is also a problem. You can't hide a carcass under your jacket. A 12-year-old boy can't drag it home, unless he has a storage space where time moves 10 times slower and which is invisible to outsiders. Do-hyun smirked, for the first time in 2 days in this body. But not today. The bow is too weak for a deer. The silicon arrowhead won't pierce the hide deep enough. The beast will run off with an arrow in its side and die in a day somewhere in the thicket. This isn't hunting. It's a waste. He needs proper arrowheads, iron ones. For that, he needs a blacksmith. Do-hyun continued his patrol. By noon, he'd bagged another hare and found a hazel grouse. Plus, he'd gathered some mushrooms, dried ones, on a dead oak tree. He recognized these mushrooms, shiitake, or something very similar. They'll go into the broth as a flavor base. Then he found what he'd actually been looking for: wild honey, a hollow in an old linden tree 3 meters up. The bees were still active but already sluggish from the cold nights. In a week, they'll go into hibernation, so he had to act now. Honey isn't a treat. Honey is medicine, an antiseptic, a cough remedy, pure energy. For Min-soo, honey is more important than meat. Do-hyun took off his jacket and wrapped his hands in rags. He climbed the tree. The bees stung through the rags. It hurt. It hurt a lot. A child's skin is thinner than an adult's. He gritted his teeth and kept working. He pulled out 3 pieces of honeycomb the size of his palm, heavy, golden, dripping with honey. He put them in the storeroom. He climbed down. His hands were swollen. His face stung from 2 stings. But he had honey. The walk back took an hour. Do-hyun emerged from the forest and headed not home, but to Grandma Ok's house. He knocked. The old woman opened the door. He said he needed help, that his sister had chest fever and he needed herbs. Grandma Oak looked at him for a long time. Then she asked what he could offer in return. Do-hyun pulled a comb of honey from under his jacket. The old woman froze. Honey in these parts was worth its weight in silver. In winter, it was worth its weight in gold. She took the comb. She sniffed it. She tasted it with the tip of her finger. Her eyes closed. She said she hadn't tasted honey since her husband died, 14 years ago. Then she opened her eyes and told him to come in. Grandma Oak's house was small and dark, but bunches of dried herbs hung from the ceiling. Dozens, hundreds, lavender, mint, something with a pungent smell, something bitter. Do-hyun didn't know the local names, but he recognized the scents. The old woman took out 3 bundles. She explained that the first was for the chest, to brew and inhale the steam. The second was for fever, drink it 3 times a day. The third was for sleep. Min-soo needed to sleep a lot. The body heals itself while sleeping. Do-hyun took it all in. Then he asked if there was a blacksmith in the village. Grandma Oak replied that there was. Park Tae-seon, 4 houses to the east. But he hadn't been forging for 2 years. He drinks. Ever since his son went to war and didn't come back. Do-hyun thanked her and left. At home, he immediately tended to Min-soo. He brewed the first bundle of herbs in a small pot. He covered his sister with a blanket and sat her over the steam. She was breathing and coughing. It was a wet cough. That was a good sign. Her body was trying to expel the illness. Then he gave her some honey, a teaspoonful, honey and broth, the oldest medicine on earth. Min-soo ate the honey and looked at him with wide eyes. She said it was the most delicious thing she'd ever eaten in her life. Do-hyun felt a twinge in his chest. Not physically. A spoonful of honey. The most delicious thing in a 6-year-old girl's life is a spoonful of honey. He ruffled her hair and told her there would be more tomorrow. Her mother watched everything in silence. Then she approached Do-hyun and said she didn't recognize him. That her son didn't know anything about herbs, didn't know how to butcher meat, didn't speak like an adult. She asked who he was. Do-hyun looked into her eyes. He could have lied, he could have made up a story, but he saw not fear in her face, but weariness. The weariness of a woman who had buried one son and was preparing to bury her daughter, waiting only for a reason to give up. He told the truth, not all of it, just part of it. He said that while he was lying there in the heat, he had a dream, a long one, a whole lifetime, another life. In that life, he was an adult. In that life, he knew how to cook, he knew how to shoot, he knew how to heal. And when he woke up, he remembered everything. His mother listened. Her expression didn't change. Then she asked if he loved Min-soo. Do-hyun replied that he did. His mother nodded. She said that was enough for her, and she didn't ask any more questions. That evening, Do-hyun went to see the blacksmith. Park Tae-seon turned out to be a burly man in his 40s, with hands the size of frying pans. He was sitting on the porch, staring into space. An empty clay bottle stood nearby. The forge in the smithy was cold. Do-hyun approached and said he needed arrowheads, 12 of them. The blacksmith looked at him with a glazed expression. He asked why a 12-year-old boy would need arrowheads. Do-hyun said he wanted to go hunting. The blacksmith laughed, a hoarse, hollow laugh. He said that only a fool or a dead man would go hunting in Cheongrim. Do-hyun replied that everyone in the village was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. The blacksmith stopped laughing. Do-hyun laid a hair pelt before him, from yesterday, tanned. Not perfect, but passable. He said that for 12 arrowheads, he'd give 2 more hides and some pheasant meat. Tae-seon looked at the hide, then at the boy, then at his own hands. Big hands that hadn't done anything for 2 years except lift a bottle. He asked what kind of arrowheads. Do-hyun described them. Lightweight, narrow, with 2 blades, not for war, for hunting, so they'd penetrate deeply without breaking the bone. The blacksmith listened, and something changed in his eyes. The dullness faded. He asked how the boy knew such things. Do-hyun said he'd seen it in a dream. The blacksmith grunted. He stood up. He went into the smithy. He touched the forge. He touched the anvil. He turned to Do-hyun and said it would be ready in 3 days. and that he would stoke the fire in the forge in the morning. For the first time in 2 years, Do-hyun nodded and left. On his way home, he stopped and looked at the village. 42 households. How many of them would live to see spring? He began to count. His family would survive. Grandma Auk would survive. The blacksmith would survive too, if he started working. Hands and a purpose keep a person alive better than food. But the rest? He had seen a child of about 4 by the 3rd house. A swollen belly, legs as thin as sticks, kwashiorkor, protein malnutrition. He knew what it looked like. He knew how to treat it. Protein, meat, broth, eggs, everything the village lacks. Everything that roams the forbidden forest 400 paces from here. Do-hyun clenched his teeth. One family at a time. His own first. Then the closest neighbors. Then the whole village. But not all at once. If he started feeding everyone at the same time, questions would arise. Where did the food come from? Who is this boy? Why don't the village elders know? Rumors would reach the county within a week. And then Mr. Baek Jun-ho would arrive. The chief tax collector. The man who sees mathematics, who counts every cheek and every belly, and knows when the numbers don't add up. Do-hyun came home. He sat down by the hearth. He took out of the storeroom the hare he'd caught that day. He began to gut it. His mother sat down beside him to help, silently. Their hands worked side by side. Hers were small. His were even smaller. His father walked in with an armful of firewood. He saw the meat. He set down the firewood. He sat down beside them. Silently, too. Min-soo was sleeping on her bedding. Her breathing was slightly more even than it had been that morning. Just slightly. The herbs were working. The honey was working. The broth was working. Time was working against them, but Do-hyun was working faster. He hoped he was working faster. He didn't sleep that night. He lay there and made plans. Tomorrow, finish the smokehouse behind the house. The day after tomorrow, get the arrowheads from the blacksmith. In 3 days, the first deer. In a week, start stocking up. In 2 weeks, the first visit to the neighbors with meat. Not for free, in exchange for silence and help. Everyone he fed had to become an ally, not a witness. A network, quiet, invisible, like a storage space. Do-hyun closed his eyes. An image flashed through his mind. A gray space inside. 1 cubic meter. No, already a little more. He could feel it. The storage space was growing. Slowly, but it was growing. Filled with life. He didn't understand what that meant, but he had a hunch. Every time he did something for others, the space expanded. A hare for the family. Broth for his sister. Honey for Grandma Oak. Work for the blacksmith. It wasn't a gift. It was a contract. With whom, exactly, he didn't know yet. On the 3rd day, Do-hyun built a smokehouse. A pit in the ground behind the house. Waist deep. 2 steps wide. The walls were lined with stones from the stream. On top was a lattice of fresh branches. Above the lattice was a canopy made of birch bark and clay to keep the smoke from rising. His father helped dig. He didn't ask why. He saw the meat. He saw his son working. That was enough. Do-hyun explained the process. Cold smoking. The fire is built off to the side. The smoke flows through a channel into the pit. The meat hangs in the smoke, but not over the fire. The temperature is low. The smoke is thick. The process is long, at least 2 days. But after that, the meat keeps for months. Not a week, not 2, months. His father listened. He knew about smoking. Everyone in the village knew about smoking. But they smoked over an open fire, quickly and at high heat. The meat turned black on the outside and went bad after 5 days. What Do-hyun was describing was different. It was knowledge that didn't exist here. Gon-min didn't ask how his son knew this. The pact of silence between them was reinforced without words. While the meat was drying in the smokehouse, Do-hyun set to work on his arrows. He had 4 flint arrowheads, poor ones. In 3 days, he'd have 12 iron ones, good ones. But he couldn't wait 3 days without doing anything. Every day without meat was a day the village grew weaker. He went into the forest and this time ventured deeper. A 2-hour walk from the edge. Here, the forest was different, darker, denser. The trees were taller. The silence was thicker. The game was larger. He saw the tracks of a wild boar. a big one, with sharp tusks. A wild boar meant 30 kilograms of meat, but a wild boar was also a beast capable of killing a grown man. And Du-hyun weighed 30 kilograms himself, with a bow that could pierce a hare's hide but might not pierce a boar's. He left the boar for later, for when he had iron arrowheads. Instead, he found another hollow tree trunk filled with honey. He took it. He found a hazelnut grove, late in the season. The nuts were small but rich. He filled a bag and stowed it away. He found wild garlic. He dug up the roots. Garlic isn't just about flavor. Garlic is a natural antibiotic, for Min-soo, for everyone who's sick. Then he found a stream, wide, cold, and there were fish in it, trout or something like that, silvery, large. It was hiding in the shade of the rocks, lazily moving its fins. Du-hyun sat down on the bank and thought. No fishing rod, no net, but he had his hands and his knowledge. In the army, they taught him to catch fish with his hands. Slowly slide your palms under a rock, touch its belly. The fish freezes at the touch. Then a sharp grab and up it comes. He took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. The water stung his skin. His fingers cramped after 10 seconds. He lowered his hands under the rock. He felt the slippery side. The fish twitched. He squeezed. He pulled it out. The trout thrashed in his hands, heavy, 400 grams. He killed it with a quick blow against a rock and put it in the storage bin. He caught 2 more. His hands were completely numb. That's enough for today. 3 trout. Fish is a source of phosphorus and omega acids, things that are completely absent from the village's diet. Min-soo's brain needs this. Any child's brain needs this. On the way back, Do-hyun stopped. Something wasn't right. He couldn't figure out exactly what. Then he realized. Footprints. Not animal tracks, human ones. Boots. 2 sets of footprints. Fresh. Someone had passed through here this morning. The tracks ran parallel to his route. Then they veered west. Do-hyun crouched down and examined the prints. Good boots. Even soles. Not peasant boots. Peasants wear cloth-wrapped feet or leather sandals. These boots are army boots, or gamekeeper's boots. Next to the human tracks were others. Dog tracks, 2 sets, large, hounds, a royal huntsman. There was someone in the Cheonggrim forest whose job was to catch people like him. Do-hyun slowly straightened up. His heart was pounding. The body of a 12-year-old boy reacted to fear more intensely than he was used to. Adrenaline was pounding in his temples. His palms were sweaty. He forced himself to breathe steadily, to think. The gamekeeper had been here this morning, so he isn't here right now. The tracks lead west. He had come from the south. Their paths hadn't crossed. But if the gamekeeper patrolled the woods regularly, he would find Do-hyun's tracks. The tracks of a boy wearing light leather wraps. Footprints that appeared 2 days ago and lead straight to the village. Do-hyun looked down at his feet. The wrappings left a distinctive, shallow imprint. He had to solve this problem. He retraced his steps and began to cover his tracks. He walked 100 paces along the stream. He came out onto the rocks. He jumped onto an animal trail. Let the gamekeeper think a deer had been here, not a person. It would take time, but not forever. A professional would see the difference. Do-hyun emerged from the forest while the sun was still high in the sky. He looked around. No one was there. He made it home. His mother was cooking millet. Min-soo was sitting up. She wasn't lying down. She was sitting up. For the first time in 2 days. Her breathing was more even. The herbs and honey were working. Do-hyun felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. He pulled a trout from under his jacket. His mother dropped her spoon. Fish. They hadn't eaten fish in Tolguk since last summer. The streams near the village had long since run dry. But in Cheonggrim, the streams were full. Do-hyun filleted the trout on the table. He set one aside for Min-soo. Tender meat, boneless, lightly simmered in a broth with wild garlic. The other 2 were for the family. His mother fried the fish on a stone by the hearth. The house filled with a scent that made Do-hyun's throat tighten. It smelled like a Korean restaurant, almost, if you closed your eyes. Min-soo ate the fish in small bites and closed her eyes after each one. Do-hyun watched and thought that for this alone, it had been worth dying in that other world. The next day, the blacksmith sent his daughter, a girl of about 13, thin, wiry, short hair. Her hands were scraped, angry eyes. Baek So-yeon. She came and said her father wanted Do-hyun to come in. The spearheads were ready ahead of schedule. Tae-seon hadn't slept for 2 nights. Do-hyun followed her. On the way, So-yeon didn't say a word. She walked quickly, angrily, as if the whole world annoyed her. At the smithy, she stopped and turned to him. She asked if it was true that he went to Cheongrim. Do-hyun didn't answer. She said that if it were true, he was either the bravest or the most foolish man in the village. Do-hyun said there was a third option as well, the hungriest. So-yeon snorted. It was almost a smile. Almost. The blacksmith met him in the forge. The blast furnace was blazing. The anvil gleamed from recent work. Tae-seon looked different. Not like the man who'd been sitting on the porch with an empty bottle. His eyes were clear. His hands moved with confidence. 12 arrowheads lay on the workbench. Do-hyun picked one up. He turned it over in his fingers. Narrow. Light. 2 blades converging at the tip. The shaft matched the diameter of his arrows exactly. Perfect. Better than he'd expected. He told the blacksmith it was excellent work. Tae-seon shrugged. He said his hands remembered, even if his mind had forgotten. Then he paused and added that he'd made a 13th arrowhead. A different one. Bigger. Heavier. For a large beast. He held it out. The arrowhead was twice as big as the others. Wide. Triangular. One like this would pierce a deer's hide and sink into the palm of your hand. Do-hyun looked at the blacksmith. Tae-seon looked away. He said his son had loved to shoot too. Do-hyun took the arrowhead. He thanked him. He left the hare pelt and pheasant meat as agreed, plus a handful of nuts. Not part of the deal, just because. The blacksmith looked at the nuts and said nothing, but Do-hyun saw his Adam's apple twitch. So-yeon walked him to the door. At the threshold, she grabbed his sleeve. She said she wanted to go with him into the woods. Do-hyun said no. She said she knew how to walk quietly, that she knew the paths at the edge of the forest, that she wasn't afraid. Do-hyun repeated, no. She clenched her teeth. Her eyes flashed, but not with tears. It was from anger. She said he was just like everyone else. He thought a girl couldn't handle it. Do-hyun stopped. He turned to face her. He said it wasn't because she was a girl. It was because if they caught 2 people, they'd lose 2 people. And the village couldn't afford to lose 2 people. Let him figure out the route first. Then he'd teach her. Then they'd go together. But not now. So-yeon looked at him. The anger in her eyes slowly shifted. Not to trust, but to calculation. She was thinking it through, weighing her options, making a decision. Then she nodded, once, briefly, and she walked into the smithy without looking back. Do-hyun walked home, thinking he'd gained his first ally outside his family. Angry, proud, hungry, perfect. That evening, he refitted all 12 arrows with new arrowheads. The iron fit snugly. He straightened and sanded the shafts. He made the fletching from pheasant feathers. The arrows were good, not perfect, but good. He made the 13th arrow with a heavy tip separately. The shaft was thicker. The fletching was longer for stability. An arrow for a deer. Tomorrow he would go after his first deer. Min-soo sat down next to him while he worked, silently. She watched as his fingers wrapped the arrowhead with a thread made of tendons. Then she said she would draw him. She took a piece of charcoal and began to draw on the floor. A boy with a bow. Crooked, funny, disproportionate. The most beautiful drawing Do-hyun had ever seen in his 2 lifetimes. He reached out and placed a boiled sweet potato in her palm. A small one of the ones he'd found by the stream in the forest, roasted in the coals of the smokehouse. Min-soo looked at the sweet potato, then at her brother. She took a bite. She closed her eyes. And Do-hyun realized he would do this every day, every morning. A sweet potato in her palm. As long as this girl is alive, as long as he is alive. This is their ritual, their pact, small and unshakable as the sunrise. The first deer cost him 4 hours of waiting and a single shot. Do-hyun went to Cheongrim before dawn. He took his bow, 13 arrows, a knife. He walked 2 hours deep into the forest to the spot where he'd seen deer tracks. He found a salt lick, a natural outcrop of minerals from the soil. The deer came here to lick the ground every morning. He took up a position behind a fallen tree, 30 paces from the salt lick. He camouflaged himself with branches. He froze. He waited. His body was freezing. His fingers were going numb. He breathed slowly and shallowly. Breath control. The first thing they teach you at the shooting range. Don't move. Don't blink. Become part of the forest. An hour later, a doe came by with 2 fawns. Do-hyun didn't move. He couldn't. The doe was nursing. The fawns wouldn't survive the winter without their mother. He waited. Another hour, then another. The sun rose and began to shine through the treetops. A stag emerged around 4 o'clock. A male, a young one, 2 antlers, short antlers, a stocky build, 60 kilograms. He walked calmly toward the salt lick. He sensed no danger. No one had shot his ancestors in 200 years. Fear of humans had been purged from his blood by generations of safety. Do-hyun slowly raised his bow. A heavy arrow settled on the string, the horse tendons. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the strain. A child's body couldn't hold this bow for more than 5 seconds. He couldn't miss. The calculation, 30 paces, no wind. The arrow was heavy. The trajectory was flat. The aiming point was just behind the left shoulder blade. That's where the heart was. He knew deer anatomy, not from hunting experience, but from a biology textbook he'd read out of boredom in the army. Exhale, half an exhale. His fingers released. The bowstring snapped. The arrow flew. The deer flinched, took a step, then another. Its legs buckled. It fell onto its side. It twitched. Then it went still. The arrow had entered just behind the shoulder blade. The heart. Instant death. Almost. Do-hyun approached. The deer stared at him with a glazed eye. Do-hyun dropped to his knees and placed his palm on its neck. Warmth. Soft fur. The last drops of blood were still pulsing beneath the skin. He felt no joy. He felt gratitude and a heavy burden. He had taken a life to give life to others. It was an equation that would never be easy. He worked quickly. He slid open the belly. He drained the blood into a hollow in the ground. He collected the blood, too. Blood sausage. Sunday. He knew the recipe. He removed the hide in one piece, carefully. A deer hide in winter is worth more than silver. He butchered the carcass. Hind legs, forelegs, ribs, loin, neck, tongue, liver, heart, kidneys, brains, hooves for aspic, bones separately, fat separately, tendons separately, antlers set aside. Nothing was wasted. Every gram counted. He stacked everything in the storage area, piece by piece, and he felt the space inside expand, tangibly, like a room whose walls were pushing apart. 1 cubic meter became 3. The first deer carcass tripled the size of his storage area. Do-hyun froze for a second. 3 cubic meters. That would hold an entire deer, or 2 deer, or a month's worth of food for the whole family. He finished butchering it and covered his tracks. He buried the remains. He covered the blood with dirt. He concealed it with branches. In a week, the forest would have taken care of everything. He made his way back along the stream, over the rocks, along the animal trails. No human tracks. A ghost. He returned home empty-handed. He entered the house, closed the door, made sure no one could see through the windows, and began to take out the meat. His mother sat down on the floor. His father stood up and approached. A deer leg, a second leg, ribs, a cut of meat, the liver, the heart, the hide, the bones. The meat lay on the floor, and there was so much of it that the table couldn't hold it all. His mother covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes grew wide. She whispered that this would last 2 weeks. Do-hyun replied that it would last 3 weeks. If smoked properly, a month. Father looked at the meat, then at his son, then back at the meat. He didn't ask where it came from. He didn't ask how. He was 12. He weighed 30 kilograms, and he'd brought home a 60-kilogram deer, without a cart. without help, without a single drop of blood on his clothes. The questions Gonmin didn't ask hung in the air so thickly you could breathe them in. But he remained silent, because there was food on the floor, and his daughter in the next room was finally sleeping without wheezing, and his wife was smiling for the first time in a year. The questions could wait. Do-hyun spent the rest of the day working. He sorted the meat, the best cuts for smoking, the bones into the pot, the hide to be stretched, the fat for rendering, the tendons to dry. He prepared the liver right away, fresh, sliced thinly, seared on a stone with wild garlic. Liver must be eaten on the day of slaughter. After that, it loses half its nutritional value. Iron, vitamin A, vitamin B12, everything a body that had been starving for months needed. He placed a portion in front of each family member, a separate one for Min-soo, a small piece, tender, mashed into a puree with broth. Her stomach wasn't ready for solid food yet. Min-soo ate and wiggled her feet. For the first time in all the time Do-hyun could remember, she was wiggling her feet with pleasure, a small gesture, tiny. But Do-hyun looked at those feet and felt that, for this alone, it was worth venturing into the forbidden forest. It was worth risking his hand for this. It was worth living for this. That evening, Grandma Oak came by, uninvited. She sat down by the hearth. She sniffed the air. She said it smelled like deer. His mother turned pale. Do-hyun calmly poured the old woman some broth, thick, rich, deer broth. Grandma Oak drank it. She closed her eyes. She sat like that for a minute. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Do-hyun. She said he was a strange boy, that people in the village were already whispering, that neighbor Kim had seen him coming out of the forest on the third day, that the village headman's wife had noticed smoke coming from the smokehouse, that people aren't fools, and hungry people are even less foolish than those who are well fed. Do-hyun listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked what she was suggesting. Grandmother Oak replied that it wasn't her place to suggest anything. She had come to warn him, and to ask. She asked if he intended to feed only his own family or the entire village. Do-hyun was silent. He was thinking. 42 households. That's about 150 people. Feeding them all through the winter would mean hunting at least one reindeer every 3 days, plus fish, plus honey and nuts. Plus, he'd have to do all this without anyone seeing where the food came from, so the Segwans wouldn't find out, so the gamekeeper in the forest wouldn't catch him. Impossible. Almost. He replied, Grandma okay, that he would feed those who kept quiet, and those who helped. The old woman nodded. She said that was what she'd thought. Then she said there were 5 families in the village whose children were on the brink. She named them. Do-hyun memorized the names. Grandma OK stood up. She paused at the door. She said one more thing. 200 years ago, a man lived in this village. He was strange too. He fed people too. He went to Cheonggrim too. His name was Han Mu-hyuk. Then he disappeared, and the forest was closed off, and the village was abandoned, and everyone forgot, except for those who remember. Do-hyun looked at the old woman. She looked at him. Something passed between them without words. Recognition. Not of him, of what stood behind him. Grandma Auk disappeared into the night. Do-hyun stood in the doorway and watched her go. Han Mu-hyuk, a name he'd heard for the first time, and at which the vault inside him trembled, as if it recognized it. That night he lay awake and thought. 5 families with children on the brink. Tomorrow he'll start, not with meat, with broth. Bone broth made from deer bones. He has plenty of it. The broth doesn't look suspicious. A bowl of hot liquid. It could come from anywhere. You could say Grandma Auk is making a medicinal broth. People will believe the old woman. She's a local authority, plus nuts, plus honey for the children. Gradually, quietly, without a trace. A network. The first 5 families, then 10, then 20. By the first snow, the whole village should be on its feet, and his storeroom should hold a 3-month supply for the winter. 3 cubic meters isn't enough. We need more. We need to save more lives. We need to fill the space with life, a pact with the one who gave him this gift. He closed his eyes and saw a dream for the first time. Not a memory, a dream. The Chongrim forest, deeper than he'd ever ventured. A stone altar among the trees, a bowl on the altar. The bowl contained broth, hot, steaming. And next to the altar was a dog, small, red-haired. It looked at him and wagged its tail. Do-hyun woke up with wet eyes and couldn't remember the last time he'd cried in his sleep. Do-hyun began feeding the village on the 10th day after the transfer. He did this through Grandma Oak. The plan was simple. He brought her food, she distributed it to the families in need. No one knew where the old woman got the broth and honey. They thought she had stockpiles, or that the mountain spirits were helping her. In the village, Grandma Oak had always been considered a bit of a witch. Now it served as a cover. The first family was the No family. 4 children. The oldest was 10, the youngest was 2 years old. The mother was a single parent. The father had died last winter from frostbite. He'd gone out to gather firewood in a blizzard and never returned. They found him in the spring. The youngest child of the No family had never eaten meat in his life. Do-hyun learned this from Grandma Oak and sat in silence for a long time. 2 years old and had never eaten meat. In his past world, such a thing was impossible to even imagine. He made a separate broth, a light one, using quail bones. He'd found quails in Chongrim and started hunting them regularly. They were small, bony, but perfect for broth. Grandma Auk took a bowl to the No family. The mother took it without asking where it came from. Hungry people don't ask questions. They just drink. Next was the Park family, not the blacksmith, the other Parks. An old man with 2 grandsons. His daughter had gone to the city to look for work and disappeared. The old man could barely walk. The grandsons foraged for roots at the edge of the forest, not in Chongrim, but on a barren patch between the village and the river, where there were so few roots that there was barely enough for the 2 of them to keep from collapsing. A third family, a fourth, a fifth. Each with its own troubles, each with a death in the family last year, each with an empty pantry, each with a child with a swollen belly. Do-hyun worked methodically. In the morning, into the forest. 2 or 3 hours of hunting. The catch went into storage. In the afternoon, butchering and cooking. In the evening, he'd deliver it to Grandma Auk. He made broths. He smoked meat. He dried fish. He made nut paste for the children. He mixed honey with herbs for the sick. Each dish was tailored to a specific person. Broth for a 2-year-old child is not the same as broth for an elderly man with aching joints. Quail broth for little No. Thick venison broth for old man Park. Fish broth with garlic for the boy from the Yu family whose leg wound wouldn't heal. The wound wouldn't heal because his body lacked the protein needed for regeneration. Do-hyun explained to Grandma Auk about protein and healing. She listened. Then she said that her grandmother had said the same thing, only in different words. Meat heals the flesh. Broth heals the bone. Fat heals the skin. Do-hyun smiled. 1,000 years of folk medicine and modern nutrition science say the same thing, just in different languages. By the end of the second week, 5 families were eating every day. Not to their fill, but enough so that the children stopped falling, so that their eyes became clearer, so that their legs began to hold them up. Do-hyun saw how the village was changing, slowly, drop by drop, like a frozen person warming up. First the toes, then the hands, then the whole body. But along with life, questions returned as well. The village headman, Hong Byung-soo, came to see Grandma Auk on the 16th day. A large man, quiet, cautious, the kind of person who never speaks first, but always listens more attentively than others. He asked about the broth, where it came from. Grandma Auk said it was from her own reserves. The headman looked at her for a long time. He knew the old woman had no reserves. He kept track of every household. That was his job. He knew Grandma Auk's pantry had been empty for 2 months now, but he didn't argue. He nodded. He left. And Do-hyun realized that there was now one more person among them who knew, or at least suspected. For now, he was keeping quiet. But people's silence is like a rope. You can pull it tight. You can loosen it. But at some point, it snaps. Along with feeding the village, Do-hyun trained every day, 2 hours between hunting and cooking. He shot at a target he'd carved into a tree behind the smokehouse, 20 paces away, then 30, then 40. His body was weak. His hands shook after the 5th draw. His shoulders burned. His back ached. But his technique was sound. The right grip, the right anchor, the right release. Everything he'd honed over thousands of hours in Seoul. The only problem was strength. A child's body simply didn't have the muscles for a full draw. It's just a matter of time. A month of good nutrition and regular training, and he'll double his draw weight. In 3 months, he'll triple it. Protein builds muscle. He now had enough protein. He ate meat every day, and he made his family eat it too. His mother resisted. She said the best cuts should be saved for Minsu and for sale. Do-hyun explained that every family member had to be strong, that a weak person wouldn't survive the winter even with a full pantry, that food isn't just a reserve, food is fuel. If the body doesn't work, the supply is useless. His mother listened and shook her head, but she ate. Soyeon came on the 17th day. She stood by the target and said she wanted to learn. Do-hyun looked at her, then at the bow, then at her again. He handed her the bow. She grabbed it as if it were a stick. She pulled the bowstring up to her ear. She shot. The arrow flew into the sky and stuck into the roof of the neighboring yard. Do-hyun silently took the bow back. He explained, "Shooting isn't about strength. Shooting is about rhythm, breathing, balance, control." He demonstrated the stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, torso straight, left arm extended. The right hand pulls the string to the chin, not to the ear, to the chin, the anchor, the point from which the arrow always flies the same way. Soyeon tried it. Her stance was crooked, her shoulders were hunched, her elbow was sticking out. Everything was wrong. Do-hyun corrected her, calmly. No irritation, one detail at a time. Shoulder down, elbow back. Relax your fingers. Don't squeeze the bow. Hold it, like a bird. Firm enough so it doesn't fly away. Gentle enough so it doesn't suffocate. Soyeon tried again and again. 10 arrows, 20. Not a single hit. She stood there, red with anger and shame. Do-hyun told her to sit down. She didn't sit down. He said that in a past life, he'd had students who didn't hit the target until the 3rd day, and that the best of them became a champion 2 years later. Soyeon asked which past life. Do-hyun fell silent. Then he said he'd misspoken. Soyeon looked at him with the same gaze as Grandma Ok, the gaze of someone who's thinking. But she said nothing. The next day she came back, and the day after that. By the end of the 3rd week, she hit the target from 20 steps away, once out of 10 tries. But she hit it, and she didn't cry, and she didn't scream. She stood there and looked at the arrow sticking out of the tree. Then she quietly said she wanted to try again. Do-hyun nodded. Again, as many times as she needed. On the 20th day after the transplant, the temperature dropped, sharply. In the morning, her breath steamed inside the house. A layer of ice had formed on the water in the bucket. Winter was approaching faster than he'd expected. Minsu was feeling better. The cough remained, but the wheezing was gone. She ate. She drank broth. She was moving around. She was drawing with charcoal on the floor and walls. The whole house was covered in her drawings. A boy with a bow, a deer, a fish, a bowl of something hot with wisps of steam rising from it. She was drawing Do-hyun's world, a world where there was food. On the 22nd day, the Segwons arrived. Do-hyun was waiting for them. He didn't know the exact day, but he knew they would come. Grandmother Ok warned him 2 days in advance. They always arrive at the same time, before the first snow. They collect the winter tribute, grain, meat, hides, everything they could find. 2 Segwons and 4 guards, on horseback, well-fed, warm, in fine fur coats. They rode into the village like masters, because they were the masters. Village head Hong Byung-soo met them at the well. He bowed. His face was stony. His hands were behind his back. The senior Segwon dismounted. He looked around. Do-hyun watched from around the corner of his house. The Segwon was thin, angry, with the face of a man who dislikes his job but does it well precisely because he dislikes it. The guards spread out among the courtyards. They knocked on doors. They went inside. They checked the pantries. They took notes. They had lists, quotas. Do-hyun had taken action 10 minutes before their arrival, when Grandmother Ok sent her neighbor's boy, shouting that they were on their way. In those 10 minutes, Do-hyun put everything away. The smoked meat from the smokehouse into the storeroom, the hides into the storeroom, the nuts into the storeroom, the honey into the storeroom, the fish into the storeroom. He poured out the bowls of broth and washed them. He removed the bones from the cauldron. He covered the ashes from the smokehouse with dirt. When the guard entered the Chang family's house, he saw an empty pantry, a pot of thin millet broth simmering over coals, 4 thin people, a sick girl, nothing extra. The guard made a note of it. He moved on. Do-hyun stood by the wall and smiled, not on the outside, on the inside. The guard walked within a step of him and had no idea that the boys standing nearby concealed more meat than the entire Segwon convoy. The storeroom was silent, invisible, imperceptible, its secret, its shield. But then the Segwon made a personal round through the village, the elder one, the angry, thin one. He walked down the street and looked, not at the houses, at the people, at their faces, at their hands, at their cheeks. And Do-hyun saw him stop, looking at the boy from the No family, the 2-year-old who 2 weeks ago couldn't stand up. Now the boy was standing, and his cheeks weren't gray, they were pink. Segwon looked at the boy, then at the mother, then at the village head. He said nothing. He wrote something down in his book and moved on. Do-hyun felt a chill, not because of the weather. Segwon had seen it. He saw that the village didn't look the way it should. People who were supposed to die weren't dying. Children who were supposed to fall were standing. This was an anomaly, and this man had recorded it in his book. And that book would be sent to the county, and it would land on Mr. Baek Junho's desk. The Sogwons left by evening. They took a little with them. There was nothing to take. The village looked empty, starving, dying. But the Sogwon had seen rosy cheeks, and Do-hyun knew that was a problem. That evening, he took everything out of the storeroom. He hung the meat in the smokehouse. He put the bones on to boil. He returned the hides to the drying racks. Life returned to the house like water to a riverbed. Min-soo sniffed the air and said it smelled good again. Do-hyun ruffled her hair and placed a sweet potato in her palm. Their ritual, morning and evening. A small boiled sweet potato in a small palm. Then he sat by the hearth and thought. He needed to pick up the pace. The Segwons would return, and next time, someone smarter might come with them. Someone who would count calories instead of cheeks, logic instead of faces. There were 3 weeks left until the first snow. In 3 weeks, he had to fill the storeroom to the brim. Deer, wild boars, fish, honey, nuts, roots, everything the forest could provide. And at the same time, he had to solve the problem of the gamekeeper. Because the more often he went to Cheonggrim, the more tracks he left behind. And somewhere in this forest, a man with 2 hounds was on the prowl. A man whose job was to find people like him. Min Hansol. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew she existed. He knew from the tracks on the frozen ground, from the prints of army boots, from the dog tracks alongside the human ones. She was there, in his forest, and sooner or later, their paths would cross. Do-hyun closed his eyes. The list in his head grew longer, but he no longer felt fear. Fear is a luxury for those who have time to be afraid. He had no time. He had a sister waiting for her morning sweet potato, a village waiting for broth, and a winter that waits for no one. They met on the 26th day. Do-hyun was walking along the stream on his way back from hunting. 2 hares and a partridge were in the storage shed. The arrows were in place. His tracks had been washed away by the water. Everything was by the book. He stepped out of the stream onto the rocky bank and froze. Ahead on the trail stood a dog. Large, spotted, long ears. A hound. She stared straight at him and didn't move. Its tail was raised slightly. Its nose was twitching. It had caught his scent before he saw it. Do-hyun slowly lowered his arms. The bow was behind his back. Arrows in his quiver. If he ran, the dog would catch up in 10 seconds. If he froze, she'd know where he was anyway. A second hound emerged from behind the trees on the left. It was circling around him. A double pursuit. A classic drive-in tactic, which meant the owner was nearby. Do-hyun heard footsteps, light, confident. A girl emerged from the undergrowth, tall, thin. Her short-cropped hair was tucked under a leather cap. On her shoulders was a gamekeeper's cloak bearing the royal crest. At her belt were a knife and a short sword. In her hands, a crossbow. Not a combat crossbow, a hunting crossbow. Light, accurate. And it was aimed at Do-hyun. Min Han-sol. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew everything he needed to know. A royal huntsman, a girl, young. The very same boots whose tracks he'd seen 3 weeks ago. She was looking at him. He was looking at her. The silence of the forest lay between them like a wall. She spoke first. She asked who he was, where he was from, what he was doing in the royal forest. Her voice was even, without malice, without threat. The professional voice of someone who asks these questions every day. Do-hyun answered. He gave his name. He named his village. He said he was gathering firewood. The gamekeeper looked at his hands. Clean. No splinters. No resin. The hands of a man who hadn't touched firewood. Then she looked at his shoulder. A bow. Then at the quiver. Arrows with iron tips. She didn't repeat the question. She lowered her crossbow. She said that in Cheonggrim, poaching was punishable by the amputation of the right hand, that she was obligated to take him to the county seat, that she was sorry, but the law was the law. Do-hyun stood there, weighing his options. Run. No. The hounds would catch up to him. Fight. No. She was a grown, armed professional, and he was a 12-year-old boy. Lie. Pointless. The evidence was on him. There was only one option left. The truth. Not the whole truth, but enough. He said that children were dying in his village, that the Segwans had taken everything, that there were 3 weeks left until the snow fell, and if he didn't bring back meat, his sister wouldn't live to see spring. The gamekeeper listened. Her expression didn't change. It wasn't the first time she'd heard this. Every poacher in this forest said the same thing, because it was true. They were all starving. They were all risking their hands for meat. And she caught them and took them to the county, and then she couldn't sleep at night. Do-hyun could see it in her eyes. Dark circles, tense jawlines. A person who hates her job, but does it because without it she can't feed her mother. He could have said something else. He could have begged. But instead, he heard a sound. Quiet, faint, a whimper. Not from the hounds. From somewhere to his right, from the bushes. Do-hyun turned his head. The gamekeeper heard it too. She frowned. She called the dogs. One came over. The other didn't. The second one stood by the bushes and whimpered. The gamekeeper quickly went over there. Do-hyun followed her. There was a hole in the bushes, not a natural one, dug. A hunting pit with stakes at the bottom. Someone else's trap. Whoever had set it for a large animal. But it wasn't game that had fallen into it. The second hound was lying at the bottom. Its front paw was trapped between 2 stakes. The dog whimpered and tried to break free. Blood was flowing down its white fur. The huntress turned pale. She dropped her crossbow. She jumped into the pit. She tried to pry the stakes apart. She couldn't. They were driven in deep. The dog jerked in pain and bit its owner on the hand. A reflex. The huntress pulled her hand away. Blood on her palm. The dog was trapped below. The stakes held firm. She couldn't manage it alone. Do-hyun didn't hesitate. He jumped into the pit. He stood next to the huntress. He told her to hold the dog, tightly, by the body. Don't let it struggle. The gamekeeper looked at him. Something flashed in her eyes for a second. Surprise. The boy she'd been about to arrest just a minute ago was now standing waist deep in the pit, giving orders. She grabbed the dog, pulled it close to her. The hound whimpered but didn't bite. It recognized its owner. Do-hyun examined the paw. It wasn't broken. It was pinned between the stakes. The soft tissue was damaged, but the bone was intact. He needed to pry the stakes apart by 3 centimeters. He braced his feet against the bottom of the pit and leaned his weight against the stake. A 12-year-old body. 30 kilograms. The stake wouldn't budge. Do-hyun clenched his teeth. He leaned in harder. His back creaked. His hands were on fire. The stake shifted by 1 centimeter. More. just a little bit more. His paw slipped. The dog yelped and pressed herself against her owner. The gamekeeper pulled her out of the pit. She climbed out on her own. She held out her hand to Do-hyun. He grabbed it and pulled himself out. They stood over the pit, breathing heavily. The hound lay on her side, licking her paw. Blood was still flowing, but more slowly now. Do-hyun crouched down beside her. He looked at the wound, a deep cut. It needed to be cleaned, bandaged, and protected from infection. He took some honey out of the storage compartment, discreetly, with his back turned to the huntress, as if reaching into his bosom. He held out the honeycomb. He told her to apply it to the wound and bandage it with a clean cloth. The honey would prevent it from getting infected. The gamekeeper took the honeycomb. She looked at it, then at the boy, then at her dog. Silently, she treated the wound. She bandaged it with a strip from her skirt. The hound lay still. She let her. Do-hyun stood nearby and waited to see what would happen next. Arrest, deportation, his hand on the chopping block, or... The gamekeeper straightened up. She looked down at him. She said the trap wasn't hers. Someone else was in the woods. Someone who set traps for large game. And that someone was dangerous. Not to the deer, to people. A hunting pit with stakes would kill a child if he fell into it. Then she paused. She said she hadn't seen him today, that he hadn't been in this forest, that they hadn't met. Do-hyun nodded. She whistled to the dogs. The healthy hound ran up immediately. The wounded one got to her feet and limped over to her mistress. The huntress turned and walked into the woods. After 10 steps, she stopped. Without turning around, she said that his tracks were as easy to read as a book, that he followed the same paths over and over, that if she'd found him in 3 weeks, any fool could find him in 4. She told him to change his routes, to walk over rocks, through water, over roots, and not to go into the southern part of the forest. There were traps there. Then she left. Do-hyun stood where he was and listened as her footsteps faded away. Then he sat down on the ground. His legs wouldn't hold him up. His hands were shaking. The adrenaline wore off and his body went limp. She had let him go. The royal gamekeeper, whose job was to catch poachers, had let him go because he'd rescued her dog, or because he was 12 years old, or because she was tired of catching hungry people and leading them to their execution, or all of the above. Do-hyun stood up. He walked home, over rocks, through water, over roots, just as she had said. At home, he silently handed the meat to his mother. He sat down by the hearth. Min-soo climbed onto his lap, warm, light, alive. He hugged her and sat there until it got dark. That night, he didn't make plans. He didn't count. He didn't make lists. He just sat there, holding his sister. And he thought that this world, for all its cruelty, was arranged just like his past one. In it, there are people who do terrible work and hate themselves for it. And sometimes, a single dog is enough for a person to choose mercy over the law. On the 28th day, Do-hyun returned to the southern part of the forest, not to hunt, to search. Someone had set traps, professional ones, with stakes. This wasn't a farmer from a neighboring village. Farmers set snares and nooses. Trapping pits with stakes are the work of a hunter, or a mercenary, or someone who wants the forest to be a place of fear. He found 3 more pits. The first snow fell on the 32nd day. Do-hyun woke up and saw white light through the cracks in the shutters. He went out into the yard. The world had changed overnight. The roofs were white. The ground was white. The sky was gray and low. The silence was so thick it rang in his ears. The snow wasn't deep, just ankle deep. A preview. Real winter would come in a week or 2. But the snow changed everything. Footprints. On white snow, every footprint stands out like ink on paper. Walking to Cheonrim had become 10 times more dangerous. Every step from the village to the edge of the forest. Every step inside the forest. Everything is visible. The gamekeeper will see it. The Saegwons will see it. Even the neighbors will see it. The boy heads toward the forbidden forest every morning. He returns empty-handed, but his family is well fed. Do-hyun stood in the yard and reworked his plan. Snow is a problem, but snow is also the solution. Animals leave tracks too. Deer follow the same trails. They trample down the snow. If he follows a reindeer trail, his footprints will blend in with the animals. Plus, there's water. The stream in the forest won't freeze for another month. Rocks on the bank. Tree roots. He'll map out a route that leaves no traces, not even in the snow. But that takes time, which he doesn't have. Over the past 4 days, he's filled his storage bin to the brim. 3 cubic meters, 2 reindeer, 4 hares, 6 partridges, 10 trout, honey, nuts, roots, dried mushrooms. This will be enough for his family for 2 months, but it won't be enough for the village. The 5 families he feeds through Grandma Auk are eating through the supplies faster than he can replenish them. He needs a bigger storage area. He needs to fill it with life, to save more people. But he's already saving them. 5 families, 15 children, and the storage space isn't growing. Why? Do-hyun thought about this for 2 days. Then he realized, he isn't saving them, he's feeding them. There's a difference between the two. To feed means to give food. To save means to change the situation. The broth from Grandma Auk is feeding. It's not saving. If he disappears tomorrow, these families will start dying again in a week. He hasn't changed anything. He's just postponed it. For the reservoir to grow, he needs to give people not food, but opportunity. Not a fish, but a fishing rod. Do-hyun sat by the hearth and devised a new plan. Hunting. He can't hunt alone forever. He needs people. So-yeon is already learning to shoot. In a month, she'll be able to hunt small game. If he adds 2 or 3 more students, by midwinter the village will have a team of hunters. Fishing. The stream in the forest isn't the only one. There's a lake a 2-hour walk to the north. Grandmother Auk told him about it. A forest lake. There are so many fish there that in winter she breaks the ice herself. If we organize ice fishing, the village will have protein without having to hunt. It's less risky, fewer tracks, food preservation. The smokehouse is up and running, but 1 smokehouse for 42 households is nothing. We need 10. And we need to teach people how to smoke meat properly. Cold smoke. At least 2 days. Don't roast it over an open fire. Trade. In a month, he'll have a surplus of smoked meat. A surplus that can't be stored forever, even in a storage cellar. This surplus can be traded for salt, for iron, for cloth, for tools, for everything the village needs to survive the winter. But to trade, he needs someone from outside, someone who knows the roads and the markets. He doesn't have anyone like that yet. Do-hyun was writing out a plan with a charcoal stick on the back of a reindeer hide. His father approached. He stood behind him. He read it. He remained silent. Then he sat down beside him. He said that a hunting party wasn't a game, that shooting at a target and shooting at an animal were 2 different things, that discipline was needed, trails, signals, rules. He knew. He was a former soldier. Do-hyun looked at his father. For the first time, Gon-min had offered to help on his own. He hadn't just silently strained his tendons. He hadn't just carried firewood. He had, with words. Do-hyun nodded. He said that this was exactly the kind of person he needed, someone who knew how to lead people. His father was silent for a moment. Then he said he was ashamed, that his son was doing what he himself should be doing. That a 12-year-old boy was feeding the village while a grown man sat by the hearth. Do-hyun replied that he'd been sitting by the hearth because he didn't have a plan. But now he had a plan. And in this plan, his father was more essential than 10 bows. Gon-min looked at his son. His eyes were shining, not from tears, but from something else. From life returning to a body accustomed to emptiness. He nodded. He stood up, put on his jacket. Said he'd go talk to the guys, the ones he knew, the ones he trusted. Do-hyun said you could only trust those who had children, those who had something to lose. His father nodded. He left. He returned in the evening. 3 men came with him, thin, wiry. Their eyes were hungry and angry, but not at Do-hyun, at the world that had brought them to their knees. Che Tae-hyun, 30 years old, a former river fisherman. His boat was taken away to pay off debts. 3 children. Park Min-woo, 25 years old, the nephew of the blacksmith Tae-sun, strong, silent, hands like shovels. His wife is about to give birth. Son Il, 40 years old, a former lumberjack. He knew the forest better than anyone in the village. He'd been sneaking to the edge of the Chonggrim forest for firewood for 20 years. He'd never been caught. They sat down in the Chon family's house. Do-hyun placed a bowl of venison broth in front of each of them, hot, thick, amber-colored. The three men looked at the broth, then at the 12-year-old boy who had cooked it, then at each other. Then they drank, in silence, down to the last drop. Tae-hyun, the fisherman, set down his empty bowl and said that the last time he'd eaten meat about 2 months ago. Do-hyun poured him a second bowl and began to speak. He explained the plan. A hunting party, 3 men plus him, plus So-yeon when she's ready, routes through the forest, in shifts, 1 hunter per day. The fewer people in the forest at the same time, the fewer tracks. Everyone will learn to shoot. He'll teach them. His father will teach tactics. The lumberjack will teach them the trails. The catch will be divided. 1/3 to the hunter, 1/3 to the hunter's family, 1/3 goes to the village's general supply. The men listened. They didn't interrupt. When he finished, the lumberjack asked what would happen if they got caught. Do-hyun answered bluntly, "A hand, the right one." Each of them knows the price, but the price of refusal is higher. Wife, children, winter, death. It's not his decision. Everyone decides for themselves. Tae-hyun said he had nothing to lose but his hand, and without a hand, he couldn't feed his children. So either he feeds them now with 2 hands, or he doesn't feed them later with just 1. The math is simple. Min looked at his hands, big, strong. Then he said his wife was due in 2 months. The baby needs meat. The mother needs meat. He's going. The lumberjack said nothing. He just nodded. Do-hyun took out a map, drawn with charcoal on a hide. Chonggrim, trails, watering holes, animal crossings, dangerous zones. The southern part with hunting pits. The gamekeeper's routes, as far as he'd figured them out. The men leaned over the map. Pointed to the northern part. He said there was an old clearing there. The game travels along it toward the lake. If they set up an ambush in the clearing, they could catch a deer every 2 days. Do-hyun nodded. He marked it on the map. Tae-hyun asked about the lake, the fish. Do-hyun confirmed it. Tae-hyun said he was a fisherman. If they gave him a net, he'd catch enough fish to feed the whole village. There was no net, but one could be woven from hemp rope. The blacksmith had hemp. He used to have some. Maybe there was still some left. Do-hyun looked at these 3 men, hungry, angry, ready, and felt the reservoir inside him tremble. It expanded slightly, not because of food, from a decision. These people had just decided to live, and that was worth more than a deer. Training began the next morning. Do-hyun taught archery. His father taught tactics. Move quietly, to wait, not to rush, to let the game come within range for a sure shot. The lumberjack, taught them how to read the forest, where the wind blows, where the shadows fall, where the game stands in the morning, where in the evening. Min-woo turned out to be a hopeless shot, but he hauled fallen trees as if they were feathers. His task became something else, butchering, carrying, hard work. Tae-hyun was an average shot but fished like a god. He wove a net in 3 days from scraps of rope and hemp. Rough, crooked, but it worked. And on his very first trip out to the lake, he pulled in 12 fish. Large, fatty, lake trout, each weighing half a gram. 6 kilograms of fish in a single trip. Do-hyun looked at the catch and did the math. If Tae-hyun went out to the lake every other day, that would be 90 kilograms of fish a month. Plus a deer every 3 days. That's another 200 kilograms of meat. Plus small game, hares, partridges, pheasants. The village could survive the winter. Not barely, not by counting every grain, but for real. With plenty to spare, with warmth, with meat, for the first time in 20 years. On the 38th day, the storage area had expanded to 5 cubic meters. Do-hyun stood in the forest after a successful hunt and felt the space inside him expand. Not because of the meat, because of Min-so, who had run across the yard for the first time that morning. From his mother, who sang as she worked. From his father, who walked into the forest with the men, his back straight as a soldier's. From So-yeon, who hit the target 5 times out of 10 from 30 paces. From the little boy from the No family, who said the word meat for the first time in his life. Fullness of life. Now he understood what that meant. Not his life, theirs, everyone's. Every life saved expanded his gift. Every bowl of broth, every sweet potato in a child's palm. Every person who chose to live instead of waiting for death. 5 cubic meters. That held a month's supply for the entire village. And that was only the beginning. Winter struck on the 40th day. It didn't creep up, it struck. The temperature dropped so sharply overnight that the water in the well froze to the bottom. Snow fell non-stop for 3 days. It piled up waist-high. The wind howled between the houses like a hungry beast. The village froze in place. People didn't go outside. They sat by their hearths and burned their last logs. Do-hyun knew this was coming. He had prepared. He had been stockpiling firewood for 3 weeks. He stacked dry logs in the storage shed until there was no more room. Smoked and fresh meat lay inside. Fish, nuts, honey, root vegetables. Broth cooked in advance and poured into clay pots. Inside the storage shed, time passed 10 times slower, and the broth remained warm. He could pull out a hot meal in the middle of an icy night, just as a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat. The first 3 days of the blizzard were the hardest. The village was cut off. The roads were buried in snow. No one could go more than 10 steps from their home. Do-hyun walked, every morning, from house to house. The 5 families he had been feeding through Grandma Oak. Now he came himself. He wasn't hiding anymore. The blizzard concealed him better than any legend. In the white haze, you couldn't see anything beyond arm's length. He walked along a rope he had stretched between the houses beforehand, like a climber on a safety line. From house to house, a bowl of broth, a piece of smoked meat, honey for the children, a sweet potato for Minsu, whom he'd left at home but who waited for him at the door every morning, counting the minutes. The No family. His mother opened the door and saw the boy standing in the blizzard, holding a steaming bowl. Steam rose from the broth, and the boy stood in a white cloud like a ghost. She snatched the bowl. She grabbed him by the hand. She dragged him into the house. 4 children were sitting by the nearly extinguished hearth. There was no firewood left. Do-hyun took off his jacket. He pulled out 3 logs from under it, from the storage area. He stoked the fire. The flames roared. The children moved closer. The youngest, a 2-year-old boy, reached out his hands toward the fire and laughed. The mother stood by the wall and watched. Then she quietly asked why he was doing this. Do-hyun replied that he was making broth, not for strangers, but for his own family. She covered her face with her hands. On the 4th day, the blizzard subsided. The sun came out, and the world glistened so brightly that it brought tears to their eyes. The snow lay smooth and white, beautiful, deadly. Do-hyun stepped outside and surveyed the village. The roofs had held up, but the walls of 3 houses had collapsed under the weight of the snow. People had spent the night at their neighbors' houses. The well had frozen over. They needed to melt snow for water. There wasn't much firewood. He gathered a group, his father, Taehyun, Minwoo, Il, plus Soyeon, who refused to stay home. 6 people. Tasks. Minwoo and Il clear the paths between the houses. Taehyun melts snow and carries water. Father checks the houses and assesses who needs help. Soyeon helps Grandma Ok with the sick. Do-hyun goes into the forest, alone. Cheongrim, covered in snow, was another world, white, quiet. The trees stood like columns in a temple. Snow on the branches, snow on the ground. Not a sound, not a movement. The animals had hidden themselves away. The deer had gone deep into the forest toward the southern slopes where the snow was thinner. The hares had burrowed into their holes. The birds were silent. Do-hyun walked for 2 hours before he found fresh tracks. A wild boar, a big one. It was heading southeast, toward a watering hole that hadn't frozen over yet, a hot spring. Do-hyun hadn't known about it before. He followed the trail. An hour later, he emerged into a clearing and saw steam. Water was gushing from beneath the snow, warm, almost hot. The ground around the spring was black, snowless. Green grass was pushing through in the middle of winter. Animals stood all around. Deer, 3 of them, a wild boar, foxes, even a hare. They were all drinking, peacefully, just like at a watering hole in the savannah. Do-hyun froze behind a tree and watched. This place was more than just a watering hole. It was the heart of the forest, a spot where life never ceased, even in the harshest frost. And next to the spring stood something else, a stone, large, flat, covered in moss, with something carved into its surface. Do-hyun waited until the animals had left. Then he approached the stone. He brushed the snow off its surface. Letters, old, half erased. He couldn't read them all, but he made out some of them. A name, Han Mu-hyuk, and a date, 214 years ago. And one more word that he read 3 times before he believed it. Home. Han Mu-hyuk, home. The man who, 200 years ago, had fed this village. He'd left the stone by the hot spring in the heart of the forbidden forest, and he'd called this place home. The repository inside Do-hyun stirred. It didn't expand, it stirred, as if it recognized the place, as if it had been here before, in another body, in another life. Do-hyun placed his palm on the stone. The stone was warm, not from the spring, from something else. He stood there for a minute, then he withdrew his hand. Not now. His sister was waiting for him at home, and the village was waiting for meat. He would unravel Han Mu-hyuk's secret later. He bagged a deer on the way back, a young female near the northern slope. 1 shot, clean, quiet. He butchered it in 20 minutes. Everything was in the storage shed. He returned to the village along the old route, along the stream, over the rocks. He covered his tracks in the snow with fir branches. By evening, there was hot broth in each of the 5 houses. The Chan family's house smelled of smoked meat and herbs. Min-soo was sitting by the hearth, drawing. A new drawing. A boy standing in the forest. Trees all around. Hot water at his feet. Deer nearby. Do-hyun looked at the drawing, then at his sister. She hadn't been in the forest. She hadn't seen the spring. She hadn't seen the stone. But that was exactly what she had drawn. He asked where she'd gotten it from. Min-soo said she'd seen it in a dream, that she'd dreamed of the forest and the hot water and a red dog. Do-hyun froze. A red-haired dog. He'd also dreamed of a red-haired dog at the altar in the forest. He sat down next to his sister and silently hugged her. Min-soo snuggled up to him and said that the dog had been smiling in her dream, and that it wasn't scary, and that it was waiting for him. Do-hyun closed his eyes. A little red dog on the road in Seoul. The last thing he'd seen in his past life. The first thing he saw in a dream in this one. A connection between worlds, between lives, between him, Han Mu-hyuk, and the Chongrim forest. He didn't know what it meant, but he had a feeling told him the answer was close, somewhere out there, deep in the forest, by a warm stone with a half-worn name. By the 50th day, Do-hyun was already feeding 12 families, not through Grandma Oak, out in the open. The situation had changed after the blizzard. People saw him going from house to house with hot broth in his hands. They saw it and remembered. Rumors spread immediately. The boy from the Chang family, the one who was sick, who isn't sick anymore, who has meat, lots of meat. Village head Hong Byung-soo came to see Do-hyun on the 52nd day, not to Grandma Ok, to him, in person. He sat down in the Chang family's house. He drank the broth that Do-hyun poured for him. He set down the bowl. He said he knew, that everyone knew, that the boy went to Chongrim, that he had a hunting party, that the meat came from there. Do-hyun remained silent. He waited. The village head continued. He said he didn't care where the meat came from. His job was to maintain order in the village. And order was simple. If everyone is fed, there is order. If children are dying, there is no order. In the 20 years he'd been village head, 37 children had died. 37. He remembered every name. This year, not a single one. Not a single one so far. And if the boy from the Chang family was the reason, the village head wouldn't ask any questions. But, the word but hung in the air. The Sogwons will return. And this time, not just ordinary ones. The senior Sogwon reported it to the county. The village head knew this from an acquaintance who was a clerk at the county office. Mr. Baek Jun-ho had taken an interest in the village of Tolgok. The records show an anomaly. A village that was supposed to lose 7 households by winter, it didn't lose a single one. The mortality rate was 0. That doesn't happen. Baek sent a request, a detailed report on the condition of the households, and a list of residents by name, indicating their health status. This meant an investigation, not a routine census, but an inspection. Do-hyun listened, his expression unchanged. Inside, everything clenched into a fist, but on the outside, he sat calmly. 12 years on his face, 31 years in his life. He asked when. The village head said in 10 days, maybe 12. It depends on the road. Snow will slow them down but won't stop them. Do-hyun nodded. He thanked him. He asked the village head to keep quiet, not about him, but about what he knew regarding the inspection. If the village found out, panic would ensue. Panic leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to death. The village head agreed. He stood up. He paused at the door. He said one more thing, that in his 20 years as village head, he'd never once seen anyone feed other people's children. That in this village, people were used to everyone fending for themselves. And that the boy from the Chang family was either a saint or a fool. And that it didn't matter to the village head which of the two was true, because the result was the same: living children. After he left, Do-hyun sat by the hearth for an hour. He thought. An inspection isn't a tax collection. It's a verification. They'll examine the people, weigh them, compare them to the records. If a person who, according to the documents, should weigh 40 kilograms weighs 55, questions are inevitable. Where did the meat come from? Where did the fat come from? Where did the rosy cheeks come from? He could hide the food in the storeroom. He couldn't hide the results of eating in front of everyone. You can't make a well-fed person hungry in 10 days. You can't regain the weight lost over 2 months of good nutrition. So a different plan is needed. Don't hide it. Explain it. Give a reason, a cover story. He went to Grandma Ox, sat down, told her about the inspection. The old woman listened. She wasn't surprised. She said she'd been expecting this. Sooner or later, a well-fed village in the midst of famine attracts attention like a bonfire in a field at night. Do-hyun asked if there was a way to explain the village's abundance without mentioning the forest. Grandma Ok was silent for a long time. Then she said one word: lake. Lake. The forest lake to the north. Technically, it's not in Cheongrim. The border of the royal lands follows the old riverbed, and the lake lies 200 paces to the north. If someone fishes on the lake, it's not poaching in the royal forest. It's fishing on no man's land. Do-hyun looked at the old woman. She knew about the boundary. She knew the lake was beyond the line. She'd kept silent for 20 years because there was no point in speaking. Fish without meat won't feed anyone. But fish, as an explanation, food. He returned home. He called his father. He called Tion. He explained his plan. Fishing on the lake must become official, visible, with nets, with a catch, with drying racks on the shore. When the inspectors arrive, Do-hyun will show them the lake and the fish and tell them that the village has found a new source of food. Fish, not meat. He'll hide the meat. He'll put away the smoked meats. He'll put away the hides. Anything that points to hunting will disappear into storage. Only fish will remain, legal, belonging to no one, from a lake that isn't in Cheongrim. Taehyun nodded. This was his territory. Fish. Nets. He knew it. His father thought about it. Then he said that a single fish wasn't enough of an explanation. People looked too healthy. You don't get rosy cheeks from fish. We need something else. Do-hyun said there was something else. A hot spring, mineral water. In his past world, people used to travel to mineral springs for treatment. Hot water with minerals strengthens the body. It heals the joints. It heals the skin. It improves digestion. If the village found a hot spring and drinks from it, that explains the improvement in health. Partially. Together with the fish, it's enough for the inspector to believe it, or at least not to find evidence to the contrary. The father looked at his son. He said it was a good plan. Bad, but good. Bad because it was based on a lie. Good because the lie was logical. For the next 8 days, the village worked. Not everyone, just those who knew. Taehyun and 2 assistants went to the lake every day. They caught fish. A lot. Ostentatiously. They dried the fish in plain sight. They built a drying shed on the shore. You'll trampled a path from the village to the lake. A wide one. Conspicuous. So the inspector would see that the trail was old, well-trodden, that the village had been going to the lake for a long time. Meanwhile, Do-hyun was clearing the village of any traces of hunting. The smokehouse behind his house was covered with dirt and snow. The hides were stowed away in the storage shed. The bones were buried. The arrows were hidden. The bow was taken apart and stashed in the attic, just as before. Min-soo asked why he was hiding the bow. Do-hyun said that bad people would come, and if they saw the bow, they'd take it. Min-soo said she'd draw pictures of those bad people. She'd make them look ugly. Do-hyun smiled, his first genuine smile in a week. On the 60th day, the inspection party arrived. Not 2 sogwons and 4 guards, 5 sogwons and 10 guards, on horseback, with a clerk, with scales, with measuring ropes. And with them was a man whom Do-hyun recognized from Grandmother Oak's description even before he saw his face. Mr. Baek Jun-ho, the chief sogwon of the county, thin, tall. His face was sharp as a blade. His eyes were quick and calculating. He dismounted by the well and surveyed the village with a single, sweeping glance. Do-hyun watched from around the corner, and from the way Baek looked, he realized that this man wasn't seeing houses or people. He was seeing numbers. He was counting roofs, walls, smoke from chimneys, the number of people on the street, their clothes, their approximate weight. He was tallying tolgok the way an accountant balances the books, and the numbers didn't add up. Do-hyun could tell by the way his lips tightened, a thin line of dissatisfaction. Something didn't match his records. The inspection lasted 2 days. They went through every house. They looked into every pantry. They weighed the grain. They counted the livestock, of which there was almost none. They recorded names. They checked everyone's health. The clerk wrote everything down. Baek stood nearby and watched, silently, counting. Do-hyun kept to himself. An ordinary boy, skinny, small, unremarkable. When the guard entered his house, he saw what he was supposed to see. Poverty, a barley broth, an empty pantry, a sick girl who coughed on command from Grandmother Ok, who had given her a special herb that caused a temporary cough. Min-soo played the part perfectly, like a little actress. On the 2nd day, Baek asked the village head to show him the source of their food. The village head led him to the lake. Taehyun was already there. Nets in the water, fish on drying racks, a shed, a trail, everything as it should be. Baek surveyed the lake. He checked the border on the map. The lake was indeed outside the boundaries of Cheonggrim, 214 steps away, he counted. The fish were legal. Then he examined the hot spring. The village head took him there as well. Baek stood by the spring and looked at the warm water amid the snow. He touched it. He tasted it. He sniffed it. The clerk took notes. Baek returned to the village. He stood in the square by the well. He thought. His face was expressionless. His eyes darted about. Do-hyun watched from around the corner and read him like a target at a shooting range. Baek didn't believe it. The fish and the spring explained a lot, but not everything. The children were too healthy. Their cheeks were too rosy. That was too much to be explained by just fish and mineral water. But he had no evidence to the contrary. The storerooms were empty. No meat, no hides, no weapons, no smoked meats. Everything was in storage, invisible, intangible. Park Jung-ho was a smart man. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't prove exactly what, and that angered him more than the theft itself. He hated unsolved problems. Before leaving, Baek did one thing. He went to Grandma Oak's house. He knocked. He went inside. He came out 10 minutes later. Her face was the same, impenetrable. Do-hyun didn't know what he'd asked. Grandma Oak later said only one thing, that Baek was smart, very smart, and that he would return. The inspection team left. The village breathed a sigh of relief. Do-hyun didn't. He knew that Baek would return, and that next time he'd have a plan. Not notes or scales, something else, something smarter. That evening, Do-hyun took food out of the storage room. The village came alive again. The smokehouse was billowing smoke. The broth was simmering. Min-soo sat by the hearth and drew, a man with a sharp face on a horse. She drew it poorly, just as she'd promised. A week had passed since Baek's departure. Do-hyun didn't let his guard down. He knew that every peaceful day was a reprieve, not a victory. Winter was in full force, snow chest deep. The frost was so bitter that the sap on the trees cracked with a loud snap. People left their homes only when necessary, or to fetch water. Do-hyun went into the forest every other day, a new route each time, along the stream, over roots, across rocks, through thickets where the snow lay like a canopy on the branches, never touching the ground. He learned from the forest. The forest taught him in return. The storeroom was full, 5 cubic meters of food, meat, fish, honey, nuts, broths in pots, smoked meats, dried fish. There was enough for the whole village, for a month, maybe a month and a half. But winter lasted 9 months, and he couldn't let his guard down for even a single day. On the 65th day, what he had been waiting for and dreading happened. Min-soo let it slip, not out of malice, just childishly. A neighbor's daughter asked where Min-soo got her rosy cheeks. Min-soo replied that Oppa pulls meat out of thin air. He just reaches out his hand and, poof, meat. The girl told her mother. Her mother told a neighbor. By evening, half the village knew. Do-hyun found out from Grandma Ok. He came home. He sat down across from Min-soo. She could tell right away from his expression that something was wrong. His eyes widened. His lip trembled. She knew she'd done something wrong. She didn't understand exactly what, but she could feel it. Do-hyun didn't yell. He wasn't angry. He took her hands. He said there was a secret that mustn't be told. That if bad people found out how Oppa got the meat, they would take Oppa away, far away, forever. Min-soo began to cry, quietly, without a sound. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she clung to his hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She said she'd never tell anyone again, not a single person. Do-hyun hugged her. He held her until she stopped trembling. Then he wiped her face and placed a sweet potato in her palm. She ate it without letting go of his hand. But the rumors had already spread. Meat from thin air, a child's fantasy, or maybe not. Adults in a starving village might believe anything. Mountain spirits, witchcraft, the blessing of the ancestors, or worse, demons, a curse. A boy possessed by an evil spirit that gives him food in exchange for his soul. Do-hyun heard whispers, on the street, by the well, beyond the walls. Some whispered with gratitude, others with fear, still others with calculation. He knew that among the 42 households there were people who would sell him out in exchange for a reduction in their tax burden. Not out of malice, out of desperation. A starving person who sees a way to save his family at the expense of someone else's child is not a villain. He's simply starving. Do-hyun solved the problem differently than he'd expected. He didn't deny it. He didn't hide. He went out to face the people. On the 67th day, he asked the village head to gather the villagers, all 42 households, at the well at noon. The village head looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. The people came. Not all of them. 36 households. 6 didn't come. They were afraid, or they didn't believe him, or they were too weak. Do-hyun stood by the well, a 12-year-old boy in front of a crowd of adults, skinny, small. The wind ruffled his jacket. He spoke softly. People moved closer to hear him. He said he had no magic, no spirits, no demons. He just knew how to hunt. He'd learned in a dream, a long dream he'd had while he was sick. The dream taught him how to shoot, cook, and heal. He knew it sounded strange, but strange things happen in this world. Grandma Ok stood in the crowd and nodded. The old woman's authority carried weight. If Grandma Ok believed it, then it must be true. Then he said the most important thing, that he could feed the entire village, every household, every day until the end of winter. But he needed silence, complete, absolute silence. Not a single word must leave Tolgok. Not to merchants, not to relatives in other villages, and certainly not to the Segwans. If word reached the district, men with swords would come. And they wouldn't just take him, they'd take everyone. The food, the children, their freedom. He paused. Silence. 120 pairs of eyes were fixed on him. Then he pulled a smoked venison ham from under his jacket. Large, heavy, golden brown. The scent wafted across the square. People stared at the meat. Someone swallowed hard. Someone covered their mouth with their hand. Someone began to cry. He placed the leg on the edge of the well. He said this was the first. There would be more. Every day there would be broth for every household. Meat every other day. Fish. Honey for the children. Nuts. Root vegetables. Everything. But only if they remained silent. The village head stepped forward. He turned to the people. He said that anyone who opened their mouth would answer to him personally. That he had been the village head for 20 years and knew everyone in this village, and that in those 20 years he had seen 37 children's coffins, tiny ones, and that if anyone wanted to add a 38th, let them speak now. Silence. The people were silent. Then a woman from the No family stepped out of the crowd, the one whose 2-year-old son had never eaten meat in his life until 2 weeks ago. She approached Do Hyun. She knelt before him. She touched her forehead to the ground. She said nothing. She simply bowed. She stood up. She walked back into the crowd. Old Man Park followed her. He bowed as well. Others followed him, one by one. Not everyone, but enough. 26 people from 36 households knelt before a 12-year-old boy by the village well. Do Hyun stood there, not knowing where to look. In his past life, students had bowed to him at the shooting range, formally, politely. A ritual. This was different. This was real, intense, alive, like the meat he was taking off the fire. He told everyone to stand up. He said there was no need to bow, that they just needed to eat and be silent and live. The people dispersed. Grandma Oak carried away the ham to distribute, fairly, equally, to every household. Do-hyun walked home and felt the reservoir inside him growing, not by a drop, in a flood. 120 people who had decided to live, who had decided to remain silent, who had decided to entrust their lives and the lives of their children to a 12-year-old boy. The storehouse expanded. 7 cubic meters. 8. 9. He stopped in the middle of the street. He closed his eyes. 9 cubic meters. That would hold enough supplies for the whole village for 2 months. Min-soo was waiting for him at the door, with a sweet potato in her hand. She held it out to Do-hyun. Usually he gave it to her. Today, she was giving it to him, a small gesture, their ritual in reverse. Do-hyun took the sweet potato, took a bite, and sat down on the threshold because his legs wouldn't hold him up. Not from exhaustion, from what was happening inside. The storeroom was growing. The village was alive. Winter stood outside the walls like a hungry beast, but inside the house it was warm. And Min-soo was sitting right next to him, and the smell of broth filled the air. And for the first time in 67 days, Do-hyun allowed himself to think that maybe he would succeed. On the 70th day, Yuna came to the village. Do-hyun hadn't known about her beforehand. No one had. She appeared out of the blizzard like a ghost, skinny, pale, wearing a monk's cloak that was 3 sizes too big for her, barefoot, through the snow. Barefoot through the snow at -20. Grandma Auk was the first to see her. She screamed. She called for help. They dragged the girl into the old woman's house. They laid her by the hearth. She was conscious but barely breathing. Frostbite on her feet, on her fingers. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were sunken. But even so, she was smiling. A quiet, calm smile of someone who had gone where they wanted to go and had arrived. Do-hyun arrived 10 minutes later. He examined her feet. 2nd-degree frostbite, blisters, swelling. Another hour in the cold, and she would have lost her toes. He brought some broth from the house. Venison broth. Hot, thick. He poured it into a bowl and set it in front of her. She looked at the broth, then at him. She asked if he was the boy who fed the dead villages. Do-hyun froze. Dead villages. The rumors had spread farther than he'd thought. Not from Tolgok, from neighboring villages where the hunting party had begun secretly delivering excess meat via Ilya. 2 villages to the east and 1 to the south. They were given smoked venison and dried fish, without explanation, no names. The meat simply appeared at night on the village elders' doorsteps, and someone in those villages spoke up, and the story reached the mountain temple where Kim Yuna lived, a 15-year-old orphan, a healer, a student of the temple monks. She heard about the boy from Tolgok and set out, barefoot, because at the Hia, she had been taught that shoes were attachment, and attachment was pain. Do-hyun looked at her feet and thought he had many words for people who taught children to walk barefoot in the snow. None of those words were kind. He treated her frostbite, honey on the blisters, clean cloth, warm water for her feet. Not hot, warm. With frostbite, hot water is more dangerous than cold. A sudden temperature change damages the tissue. He knew this from his army training. Yuna sat and watched him work. She didn't flinch. She didn't complain. She watched in silence. Then she said his hands were like those of a doctor. Do-hyun replied that he wasn't a doctor. He was a cook. Yuna smiled. She said that was better. A doctor heals the body. A cook heals the soul. Grandma Ok stood nearby and nodded. 2 herbalists had found each other. One old, one young. One with the memory of his ancestors, the other with the knowledge of the mountain monks. Yuna stayed. She didn't ask for permission. She just stayed. By the second day, she was already walking around the village with her legs bandaged, examining the sick. She knew herbs that even Grandma Ok didn't know. Mountain herbs, rare ones, the kind that grow only at high altitudes and only in winter under the snow. She had brought a small bundle with her. Inside were 12 little pouches, 12 mixtures, for fever, for coughs, for joint pain, for swelling, for insomnia, for chest fever. Each mixture was labeled in her own handwriting, small, neat script. Do-hyun looked at the pouches and thought that this skinny, barefoot girl had brought more to the village than he had with his storehouse. Because he brought meat, but she brought knowledge. Meat will run out. Knowledge will remain. Yuna ate very little. She left half her bowl, then a third, then a quarter. Do-hyun noticed on the 3rd day. He sat down next to her at dinner. He didn't ask any questions. He simply poured a full bowl of broth with meat and set it in front of her. Yuna looked at the bowl, then at him. She said that at the temple, they taught her to eat exactly as much as was necessary to stay alive. No more. The pleasure of eating is attachment. Attachment is suffering. Do-hyun was silent for a second. Then he said that suffering is when a 15-year-old girl weighs as much as a 10-year-old boy, that her body is working itself to the bone, that she heals others while she herself is falling apart from the inside, that he could see it in her hands, in her nails, in her hair. Protein deficiency, fat deficiency, deficiency of everything. Yuna listened. Her expression didn't change. Then she said quietly that she didn't need that much food. Do-hyun didn't answer. He stood up. He walked over to the hearth. He returned with another bowl. Millet porridge with honey. Simple, warm, sweet. He set it next to the broth. He said it wasn't for her body. It was for her. Just for her. Because she deserved something delicious after walking barefoot through the snow for 40 li to treat strangers. Yuna looked at the porridge with honey for a long time. Then she picked up a spoon. She tasted it. She closed her eyes. She ate slowly, very slowly, as if every spoonful were her last. When the bowl was empty, she sat with her for another minute. Then she opened them. Her eyes were wet. She said she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something sweet. Do-hyun said she would from now on, every day. Yuna shook her head. But the next evening, she ate it all. And the next. A week later, she asked for seconds, in a whisper, barely audible, as if asking for food were more shameful than walking barefoot through the snow. Do-hyun pretended not to hear her, and poured a full bowl, heaped high. Yuna became part of the team. Not right away, gradually. She healed people. Grandma Ok taught her about local herbs. Yuna taught Grandma Ok about mountain herbs. Together, they put together a medicine cabinet unlike any other in the province. Decoctions, ointments, compresses, poultices, The people of Tolgok stopped dying from colds and infections. They stopped losing fingers to frostbite. They stopped suffering from joint pain, which, in this climate, cut down the elderly every winter. Do-hyun cooked a separate meal for Yuna every evening. Not broth, porridge, with honey, with nuts, sometimes with dried berries he found in the forest. Each bowl was made just for her, personally. She began to gain weight. Her cheeks turned rosy. Her hands stopped trembling. Her hair grew thicker. Do-hyun monitored this as if it were a schedule. Protein, fat, carbohydrates, calories. Kim Yuna was his patient, his most challenging one, because her illness wasn't in her body. The illness was in her mind, in the belief that she didn't deserve to be full. He treated it with porridge and honey every evening, spoonful by spoonful, bowl by bowl. On the 80th day, So Che-rin arrived. Unlike Yuna, she didn't come barefoot through a blizzard. She rode in on a scrawny horse, wearing a worn but expensive fur coat and carrying a leather bag stuffed with papers. 24 years old, a beautiful face, a cold strunk, eyes that assessed everything around her with the precision of a scale. The daughter of the So trading house, the former trading house, ruined 3 years ago, ruined by Mr. Baek Jun-ho. She stopped at the village headman's house, asked for a place to stay for the night, paid with a silver coin, her only one, her last. Do-hyun heard about her from Il, a stranger in the village in winter. That was quite an event. He came to see for himself. Che-rin was sitting by the hearth in the village headman's house, drinking boiling water. Not broth, boiling water. She hadn't asked for food. Her pride wouldn't allow it. Do-hyun sat down across from her. Silently, he placed a bowl in front of her. Deer broth with roots and wild garlic. Che-rin looked at the bowl, then at the boy. She asked how much it cost. Do-hyun said it was free. Che-rin smiled wryly. She said that in her world, nothing was ever free. Do-hyun replied that it meant she had ended up in a different world. She ate, neatly, not greedily, like someone who was used to eating in front of others and knew they were being watched. Then she set down the empty bowl and began to speak, straight to the point, no preamble. She knew about Tolguk. She knew about the meat. She knew about the fish from the lake. She knew that someone in this village was controlling a flow of food that shouldn't exist. She hadn't come out of curiosity. She had come with a proposal. She had connections, trade contacts in 3 county towns, knowledge of routes, knowledge of prices, knowledge of people who bought smoked meat and hides and asked no questions. She could turn Tolgo's surplus into silver, silver into iron, iron into tools, tools into independence. Do-hyun listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked one question. Why was she doing this? Che-rin was silent for a long time. Then she said one word. Baek. Her father had owned salt works on the coast for 3 generations, an honest business. Baek Jun-ho came with new taxes, a triple tax, unbearable. Her father couldn't pay. Baek took the salt works, took the house, took everything. Her father died a year later, not of hunger, of shame. He sat down at an empty table in an empty house and didn't get up in the morning. Che-rin was left alone, with debts, with a name that had been tarnished. For 3 years she made plans. She gathered information. She looked for a way to strike at Baek so that he would lose everything, just like her father. But alone, she was weak. She needed an ally, someone with resources, with meat, hides, and a reputation that could be turned into leverage. Do-hyun looked at her. He saw rage, cold, calculating, a fury that had waited 3 years and hadn't cooled. He could have said no. Revenge is dangerous. Revenge is a path to a pit of stakes. But he remembered Baek's face, his calculating eyes, his thin lips, a man who would come again, who wouldn't stop, who would keep digging until he unearthed the truth. Baek was a threat, not an abstract one, a concrete one. And Che-rin was offering a way to eliminate that threat, not with a sword, but with paper. Do-hyun said that revenge was a bad motive. Che-in tensed. He continued. He said that revenge is a bad motive, but justice is a good one, and that the difference between them is that revenge leaves a void, while justice leaves order. He proposed a different plan, not to kill Baek, not to ruin him, to expose him, to gather evidence of his abuses, 3 years of inflated taxes, confiscated property, families that had perished because of his greed, to document all of this and pass it on to someone higher up than Baek, the provincial governor, or higher still. Che-in listened. Her expression changed. The rage didn't fade, but something new appeared alongside it. Interest. Calculation. She saw that the 12-year-old boy standing before her thought like a merchant, like a strategist, like an adult. She asked where he'd gotten that from. Do-hyun said from a dream, a long dream. Che-in snorted. She said she didn't care where he came from. What mattered to her was where he was going. She stayed in Tolguk. She moved into an empty house in the 6th courtyard. The family had left for the city last spring and never returned. The house was cold. Do-hyun sent Mina to repair the roof and walls. He brought firewood. He brought food. Che-in accepted it without a word. But that evening, she came to him with some papers, maps of trade routes, lists of merchants, caravan schedules, prices for smoked meat in every city in the province, prices for salt, for iron, prices for hides, for honey. Do-hyun looked at the papers and saw what he was missing, a connection to the outside world. He could produce as much meat as he wanted, but meat without a market is just meat. With a market, it's silver. With silver, it's tools. With tools, it's independence. With independence, it's security. A chain he could see in his mind but couldn't build on his own. Che-in could. She knew people beyond the village walls. She knew how the world worked outside Cheongrim. The first trade took place a week later. Taehyun carried 20 dried fish to a crossroads 2 hours' walk from the village. There, a merchant Che-in had found was waiting for him. An exchange. Fish for salt. Real salt. Sea salt. White salt. 2 sacks. The salt returned to the village, and the women wept, because salt meant that meat could be properly preserved, that fish would keep not for a week, but for months, that food would cease to be merely food and become a stockpile. The second transaction, smoked venison for iron. The third, hides for cloth. The fourth, honey for medicinal herbs from the southern provinces for Yuna. Every transaction goes through a middleman, faceless, nameless. Che-in had set up a 3-link chain. Tolguk hands the goods to a man at the crossroads. The man takes the goods to the city. The city pays. The money is returned through another person. No one knows where the meat comes from. No one knows where the money goes. Do-hyun watched Che-in at work and thought she was worth 10 hunters. No, 20. Because a hunter feeds a village. But Che-in made it so the village could feed itself. At the same time, she was gathering information about Baek. Every transaction through merchants is a communication channel. Every merchant knows someone who knows someone. A month later, Che-in had a folder, thin but heavy, records of confiscations, testimonies from ruined families, receipts with forged seals. The amount Baek had collected in excess of the quota over 3 years, a figure that made Do-hyun's teeth ache. Che-in placed the folder on the table. She looked at Do-hyun. She said this would be enough to get Baek fired, but it wouldn't be enough to take away his freedom. For that, they'd need more. They needed his own documents, with his seal and his signature. Do-hyun nodded. He said that Baek would bring them himself when he came to the village, because he would come. And when he did, he'd sign whatever was needed. Because a greedy man will always sign a document if he thinks it will give him what he wants. Che-in looked at him. For the first time during the entire conversation, something other than calculation flashed in her eyes, something warm. She said he was a strange boy. Do-hyun replied that people often told him that winter was coming, the 100th day, the 150th, the 200th. Tolgo lived. Not a single child had died. Not a single old person had frozen to death. Not a single house had been left empty. For the first time in 20 years, the village had made it through the winter intact. Do-hyun stood in the yard on the 210th day and counted. In 7 months, he had hunted 42 reindeer, 120 hares, more than 200 birds, Tian had pulled nearly a metric ton of fish from the lake. The hunting party had grown to 8 people. So-yeon shot from 50 paces and hit her target 7 times out of 10. She had become the best among the apprentices, better than the adult men. Her hands were made for a bow. Do-hyun had seen it from the very first day. Her height, her grip, the length of her fingers, the width of her shoulders. Everything was perfect for an archer. He made her a custom bow, smaller than his, lighter, more precise, tailored to her body, to her rhythm. When So-yeon first took that bow in her hands and drew the string, something clicked, not in the bow, inside her. She stood there with the bow and felt whole. For the first time in her entire life, Do-hyun saw it. He remembered that feeling. When the instrument becomes an extension of the body, when there's nothing between you and the target but your breath and the distance. So-yeon shot. She hit the target. She shot. She hit the target. 10 out of 10, from 50 paces. Then she lowered the bow and turned to him. Her eyes were wet. She didn't understand why she was crying. Do-hyun understood. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, she was the best at something. Not in spite of being a girl, not because of it, but simply because she was herself. He told her she was more talented than he was. It was true. At 13, she shot better than he had at 13. Her potential was greater. In a year, she'd be shooting like no other hunter in the province. So-yeon wiped her eyes with her sleeve and said she wanted to teach others. Girls. There were 7 girls in the village, aged 10 to 15. All of them were hungry. All of them were angry. All of them had hands with nothing to do. Do-hyun agreed. By the end of winter, there were 10 archers in Tolguk, 8 men and 2 girls. So-yeon and Ilya, the woodcutter's 14-year-old daughter. Not an army, a militia, but enough to keep them from being defenseless. At the same time, Do-hyun ventured deeper and deeper into Cheongrim. The hot spring became his base. He went there every week. He sat by the stone bearing the name Han Mu-hyuk. He placed his palm on the warm stone and listened. The repository responded to this place. It trembled. It expanded, as if the stone were a door, and behind the door lay something vast, ancient, and waiting. On the 220th day, he went beyond the spring, for the first time. The trail led eastward, through an old windbreak, through a ravine, through a spruce forest so dense that the sky vanished, and he came upon some ruins, an old village, 5 houses, stone walls, collapsed roofs, courtyards overgrown with moss. 200 years. These ruins were 200 years old. That very village, the village of Han Mu-hyuk. Do-hyun walked among the houses and sensed. He didn't see, he sensed the life that had once been here. People, children, fireplaces, the smell of food, laughter. All of that had been there, and all of that ended in a single night, when the soldiers came and slaughtered everyone. Behind the well, he found an altar, made of stone, not very tall, with a recess at the top. In the recess stood a bowl, made of stone, intact. 200 years of rain, snow, and wind, and the bowl was still intact, as if someone had been guarding it. Words were carved into the altar, more than on the stone by the spring. Do-hyun read slowly. He made out the old letters. Whoever comes with the same heart will find here what I have left behind. Not weapons, not gold, not power. Food. I left food for those who are not yet here. Because hunger does not kill the body. Hunger kills the belief that you are needed by someone. Feed them. Not because you have to, because you can. Han Mu-hyuk. Do-hyun stood before the altar and felt the chamber within him open up. Not expand, open up, like a flower, like a door, like lungs on a deep breath. The space inside became immense. He couldn't measure it. 20 cubic meters? 30? More. The stone beneath his palm pulsed with warmth, and Do-hyun saw, not with his eyes, with something else. A person, an adult, with a face just like his own, not similar in appearance, similar in a different way, through the eyes, tired, warm, the eyes of a man who had spent his whole life feeding others and had no regrets about it. Han Mu-hyuk stood before him, not a ghost, not a spirit, an image, the memory of stone, the memory of the forest. He was smiling, and sitting next to him was a small red-haired dog, wagging its tail. Do-hyun recognized her, the very same one, from the street in Seoul, the one he had rushed to save, the one for whom he had died. She was sitting next to a man who had lived 200 years ago and was looking at Do-hyun the way dogs look at an owner they've been waiting for a long time. The vision lasted a second, or an hour. He didn't know. When the stone cooled beneath his palm, Do-hyun stood alone. Ruins, an altar, a bowl, silence. But the sanctuary within him was different, enormous, alive. And now he knew everything. He knew that the gift was no accident, that the dog on the road to Seoul was Chonrim's spirit guide, that 200 years ago, Han Mu-hyuk had rushed to save a stranger's life just the same, without a thought for his own, that the gift passes from heart to heart, not by blood, by choice. He returned to the village in silence. He sat down by the hearth. Min-soo climbed onto his lap. She looked into his eyes. She said he had been crying. Do-hyun touched his face. It was wet. He hadn't noticed. Min-soo wiped his cheek with her palm, the same gesture he'd made for her hundreds of times. A small hand on his face, warm. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to just sit there. Spring arrived on the 240th day. The snow began to melt. The streams broke through the ice. The earth turned black. The air grew milder. The trees sprouted their first buds. Tolguk had survived. All 42 households. All 153 people, for the first time in 20 years. But Do-hyun knew that spring would bring more than just warmth. Spring would bring Baek. He was right. On the 250th day, Grandmother Ok came to him in the morning. Her face was serious. She said that the county clerk had passed on the news. Baek Jun-ho is assembling a detachment. Not Sogwons, mercenaries, 40 men, swords, torches. He isn't coming to collect taxes. He's coming to destroy the village, to pin it on the bandits from Chongrim. The documents are already prepared. No one in the county will look into it. The province is far away. The capital is even farther. The war in the south has captured the empire's attention. Tolguk could be wiped off the map and no one would notice. Do-hyun listened. His face was calm. Inside, a storm raged. 40 mercenaries. This isn't an inspection. It's a punitive expedition. 10 archers against 40 swords means certain death, whether there's a fight or not. He thought about it for 3 days. He planned. He adjusted his strategy. He gathered his team every evening. Father, Soyeon, Hansol, Yuna, Charon, Il, Taehyun, Minu, Grandmother Ok. Each had their own task. Every piece was in place, like arrows in a quiver. Hansol came to the village openly, for the first time. Before that, they'd met in the forest, twice after the first time. He cooked her a meal in the winter cabin, millet porridge with honey, just like Grandma used to make. She ate in silence. Then she spoke, about the forest, about the tracks, about how Baek's men were setting up traps for others, that Baek had long been conducting a secret hunt in Chongrim for personal gain, that she knew but kept quiet because Baek paid her mother a pension for her service. Do-hyun said it wasn't Baek who paid the pension. The crown paid the pension. Baek simply distributes it, and if Baek were to disappear, the pension would remain. Hansol looked at him. Then she said that he spoke like someone who knew the system better than those who lived within it. Do-hyun replied that he was a chef. Chefs know their ingredients. Hansol smiled for the first time. Now she stood in the Che family's house among the people she was supposed to be hunting, a royal gamekeeper among poachers. She took off her gamekeeper's cloak. She placed the royal token on the table. She said that when Baek arrived, she would show the token to the mercenaries. A royal gamekeeper on the village's side is an argument, not a decisive one, but a significant one. Mercenaries work for money, but the royal token isn't money, it's power. And going against the crown is a whole different level of risk. Chedin left the village 2 days before Baek's expected arrival, quietly, at night. on the same scrawny horse, to the county seat, to the governor. A folder of evidence in her bag, a folder they'd been compiling for 3 months, records of confiscations, witness, receipts, numbers that didn't add up, everything that turned Beck from a bureaucrat into a criminal. Ched-in was supposed to hand over the folder the very moment Beck entered Tolgok, simultaneously. While he was burning down the village, his career was going up in flames at the county office. Yuna was preparing the infirmary. At Grandma Ock's house, bandages, ointments, herbal decoctions for burns, tourniquets, splints. She was preparing for the worst, calmly and methodically, as if she were sorting through herbs rather than dressing wounds. Do-hyun watched her and thought she was the strongest of them all, because strength isn't a bow or a sword. Strength is the willingness to heal those who are in pain, even while you yourself are in pain. So-yeon positioned 10 archers, on the rooftops, in the shadows, behind fences, each in their own spot, each with 10 arrows. Each knew where to shoot and where not to shoot. Don't kill anyone. Shoot at the ground at their feet, at the walls behind their backs. Show that the village is armed. Don't prove that it's ready to kill. Do-hyun insisted on this. No deaths. If a fight breaks out, 40 mercenaries would crush 10 archers in a matter of minutes. Their only weapon wasn't arrows. It was the scenario, played out like a game of chess, where the opponent thinks they're playing checkers. Beck arrived on the 254th day, at night, just as Do-hyun had expected. 40 men with torches, on horseback and on foot, swords, spears, their faces covered with cloth, no insignia, no names. Bandits from Chongrim. That's how it would be written in the report. The village was waiting for them. Every house lit a light. Not on command, by agreement. When you see lights on the road, light a candle in the window. A simple rule. And Tolguk lit up. 42 houses, 42 lights. For the first time in 200 years, the village glowed in the night, as if alive. The mercenaries stopped at the edge of the village. They had expected dark houses, sleeping people, silence. Instead, there were lights, and a silence worse than noise. The silence of people who know what's happening. Do-hyun stepped out onto the square, alone, a bow in his hands, an arrow on the string, but not drawn. He stood in the snow, a 13-year-old boy facing 40 armed men. The mercenaries' leader dismounted, a large man, broad-shouldered, with a sword at his belt. He looked at the boy, at the lights in the windows, at the rooftops where silhouettes were faintly visible. Do-hyun spoke. He said he knew why they were there. He said he knew who had sent them. He said that Beck had paid them with silver that wasn't his, that the silver was stolen, that in 2 hours the governor would receive proof, and that anyone who set fire to even a single house now would become an accomplice to a criminal, not merely following orders. The ringleader listened. His expression didn't change. He'd heard threats before, from people much bigger than the boy. Do-hyun continued. He said something else. He said he knew their men hadn't eaten in 3 days, that Beck had promised payment after the job was done, that the supply train was traveling light. He assumed it was a county supply train, or so he thought. He'd been watching for 2 days, not a single wagon with provisions. 40 hungry men who'd been promised money after they burned down the village and its inhabitants. Do-hyun said there was a deer and 2 wild boars in his smokehouse, that there was hot broth in the cauldron for 40 men, that they could lay down their weapons, eat, warm up, and go home, that he wouldn't fight the hungry. The leader looked at him, then at his gang. Gaunt faces, hungry eyes. The torches trembled in their hands from weakness, not from the cold. Then he looked up at the rooftops, the silhouettes of archers, then at the gamekeeper's cloak on the shoulders of the woman who stepped out of the darkness and stood next to the boy. The royal insignia on her chest glinted in the torchlight. Then he looked at the dogs, 2 hounds, Bada and San, who stood next to the gamekeeper, baring their teeth, quietly, professional. Then he looked at the boy, and saw that the boy wasn't afraid. He stood calmly. His bow was lowered. The arrow was not knocked. He posed no threat. He offered. The leader removed his sword from his belt. He laid it on the snow. 39 men behind him looked at one another. One by one, swords and spears were laid down in the snow. 40 mercenaries sat by the fire in the square and ate venison broth, smoked wild boar, hot, thick, authentic. Dokyeon stood off to the side and watched. The mercenaries ate just as his village had eaten 7 months ago, greedily, quietly, with tears on their cheeks. Because hunger, hot food, and the mercy of strangers break people more than swords ever can. One of the mercenaries, a young guy about 18, approached him afterward. He said that Peck had promised them 10 silver pieces each, for the village, for the people, for the children. 10 silver pieces for to burn people alive in their homes. The guy spat into the snow. He said his own mother lived in a village just like that, and that broth was better than silver. In the morning, the governor rode into Tolgok, an escort of 20 horsemen, the province's banners, shining armor, well-fed and clean horses. The contrast with the village was such that one of the horsemen looked around and whistled softly. Seated on horseback next to the governor, with his hands bound, was Baek Junho. His face was ashen. His eyes were vacant. He didn't look around. He stared at the horse's mane. Chedin had done everything right. The folder had been placed on the governor's desk an hour before Baek entered Tolguk. Records, receipts, testimonies, numbers, 3 years of theft laid out across 30 sheets. The governor read. He counted. He cross-checked. And he sent men out, not after Baek, but after the mercenaries. But the mercenaries were sitting by the fire, eating broth. Their swords lay in the snow. The torches were extinguished. No battle, no fire. Just 40 well-fed people and 1 village left intact. The governor dismounted by the well, a large man, elderly, a weather-beaten face, the hands of a soldier, not a bureaucrat. He surveyed the village slowly, houses with lights in the windows, people in the square, men and women standing and watching without hiding, children, alive, rosy-cheeked. That was the most important thing. Children. Living children in winter, in a village that, according to the records, was supposed to have lost half its population. Village head Byung-soo approached. He bowed. The governor asked who was in charge. The village head looked at Do-hyun. Do-hyun was standing off to the side by the wall. An ordinary boy, skinny, small, 13 years old. The governor followed the village head's gaze. He saw the boy. He looked at the village head. He thought it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. He walked over to Do-hyun. He stood in front of him. He looked down at him. He asked his name. Do-hyun told him. The governor asked if he had organized the defense. Do-hyun replied that it wasn't a defense. It was dinner. The governor was silent for 3 seconds. Then he laughed, briefly, dryly, like a man who hadn't found anything funny in a long time, but this was funny. He ordered his men to arrest Baek in accordance with protocol, with the charges read aloud and the testimony recorded. The governor's clerk worked for 2 hours, taking notes. The village head spoke. Grandmother Oak spoke. Do-hyun's father spoke. Each told their part. Baek sat on his horse with his hands bound, listening as his life crumbled word by word. Then the governor summoned Che-rin. She stood before him. Her back was straight, her chin was held high, her voice was calm. She presented all the documents, every receipt, every figure. 3 years of work, 3 years of waiting. And at the end, she gave her name, So Che-rin, the daughter of So Gyun, the man whom Baek had ruined and who had died at an empty table. Baek heard the name. He raised his head. He looked at her, and for the first time all morning, an expression appeared on his face. Not fear, recognition. He remembered the salt works, the old man at the empty table, the daughter who was left alone. A trifle, one of the hundreds of trifles he had committed over 10 years in office. And this trifle destroyed him. The governor had Baek taken away by noon. He dismissed the mercenaries, without punishment. They were following orders, the orders of a criminal, but they didn't know that, or they pretended not to know. Before leaving, the leader approached Do-hyun. He stood before him. He was silent. Then he bowed, not like a peasant before an official, like a soldier before a commander. He turned and led his men away. The village stood in the square, all 42 households. 153 people, alive, unharmed. The morning light fell on the snow, and it was so bright that it brought tears to their eyes. Or perhaps it wasn't the light. Silence. A long silence. Then Do-hyun's father stepped forward, Chung Gon-min, a former soldier, a proud man. He held a cup in his hand, a clay one, old, chipped. His face was unlike anything Do-hyun had ever seen, open, gentle, without the wall behind which he'd hidden for 20 years. Gon-min turned to his son. He raised the cup and bowed to the waist, deeply. A soldier for whom bowing is harder than fighting. He straightened up. His eyes were wet. His voice was quiet but steady. He said that he had thought all his life that a man was someone who knew how to kill, who protected with strength, who fed with a sword, who ruled with a fist, and that his son had shown him otherwise, that a man is someone who knows how to feed, who places a bowl before the hungry, who gives a bow not for war but for food, who doesn't raise a weapon when he can put a pot on the stove. He said he had been wrong his whole life, and that now he stands before his son and feels no shame. For the first time in a long time, he feels no shame, because his son is the best thing he's ever done in his life. Do-hyun stood there, unable to swallow the lump in his throat. Beside him, Min-so held his hand, tightly, with both hands, as always. Behind her stood So-yeon, a bow on her back. Her eyes were dry, her chin was held high. Han-sol stood beside her. Bada and San were at her feet. A dog tag hung from her chest. Her face was calm. Yuna stood beside her. For the first time ever, she wasn't gaunt. She wasn't transparent. She was alive. Her cheeks had color. Her hands didn't tremble. Chae-rin was beside her. Her back was straight. Her eyes were slightly red, but her chin was just as high. Grandma Oak sat on the porch and smiled, old, small, as thin as a twig, but alive, and needed, and waiting for Thursday tea with the boy who always comes. That evening, Do-hyun cooked, all day long. A table for 42 people from the neighborhood, the first feast of the survivors in 10 years. Smoked venison, boiled pheasant, millet with honey, salted fish from the lake, hot broth. For Yuna, a separate bowl of porridge with honey and nuts, full, heaped high. She ate it all. She didn't whisper for seconds. She asked out loud. Do-hyun poured her another serving. People ate, laughed, cried. They sang. Grandma Ok began singing an old song they hadn't sung in 20 years. A song about a boy who fed the winter. She didn't remember all the words. She made up her own. It came out a bit off, but beautiful. Min-soo was drawing, under the table, with charcoal on a board. A boy and a bowl. Their banner. Their coat of arms. Their story in 2 lines. A year passed. Then another. Do-hyun is 15. Tolgok is unrecognizable. 30 smokehouses. A fishing cooperative on the lake. 5 neighboring villages in the Cherin trade network. The Soyeon hunting school. The clinic run by Yuna and grandmother Ok. Taesong's blacksmith shop, which was open every day. The hot spring in Cheongrim became a place where people from 3 counties came for treatment. Do-hyun didn't forbid it. Cheongrim was no longer off limits. The new county official who succeeded Beck didn't meddle in Tolgok's affairs. He was afraid, or he respected him, or both. Do-hyun's name was known throughout the province. The spirit boy of Cheongrim, the boy who feeds the dead villages. Rumors spread. They grew more detailed. Half of it was untrue, but the truth was stronger than any rumor. The children weren't dying. That was enough. In the 3rd year, Do-hyun set out for the capital. Not as a supplicant, but as a man with half a metric ton of smoked meat in his storeroom, a name known across 3 provinces, and 5 men ready to follow him into the fire. On the morning before his departure, he sat on the threshold. Min-soo came out to meet him, 9 years old. She'd grown. She'd gotten stronger. Her cheeks were round. Her eyes were bright. Her cough had gone away 2 years ago and hadn't returned. She stood before him, holding a sweet potato in her hand. Boiled, sweet, small. Their ritual. 1,000 morning sweet potatoes. 1,000 little warm things in a little palm. She held the sweet potato to him and told him not to forget to come back. Do-hyun took it. He looked at her. He looked at the village behind her. Smoke from the chimneys. People on the streets. Children running. Laughter. The smell of food. Tolguk was living. Not just surviving. He lived. He put the sweet potato in the storeroom, next to the meat and fish and honey and hides and everything else he'd gathered over the past 3 years. The sweet potato took up next to nothing, but it weighed more than everything else put together. Do-hyun stood up. He hugged Min-sul for a long time. Then he let go. He turned around and walked down the road through the woods. Following him were So-yeon with a bow on her back, Han-sol with 2 hounds, Yuna with a sack of herbs, and Cherin with a leather bag stuffed with papers. And Bada ran ahead, red-haired in the morning light, almost like that little dog from the street in Seoul. Almost. The village saw them off from the well to the edge of the forest. 42 households, 153 people. Grandmother Ok stood furthest away, right by Chonggrim. She waved her hand. Do-hyun waved back. Then he turned and entered the forest. The trail led south toward the capital, to the people who write the laws, to those who can ensure that not a single child dies of hunger in winter in a wealthy empire. He walked and thought about the broth, about how broth isn't just food. Broth is time. 8 hours over a low flame. Patience, care, attention to the one who will eat it. He was walking to change the world, not with a sword, not with magic, not with an army, with a bowl, one bowl at a time. Behind him, on a pole carried by Mina, fluttered the Tolgok banner, white, simple, with a charcoal drawing, a boy and a bowl. Min-soo had drawn it. The forest parted before them. The sun shone through the branches. The hounds ran ahead. And somewhere, far deep within Chonggrim, by a warm stone with a half-worn name, a little red-haired dog lifted its head and wagged its tail. He was on his way home.